So if you take estrogen blockers, the idea is the receptors are going to no longer receive the estrogen, and therefore you won't have a reoccurrence of breast cancer as likely in the future. Okay, I understand the concept, sure. But when you do that, you're pushing yourself through menopause. And when you push yourself through menopause, you're going to get problems that come with aging sooner in life rather than later. So you're going to sit there and go, well, doctor, I don't know if I should take this medicine because what about heart issues in the future? What about osteoporosis in the future? And the doctor's going to turn to you and be like, well, I'm here to treat your breast cancer. And all I know is this is going to help you with the breast cancer. When it comes time to cross that bridge, go talk to the relevant doctor. And you're stuck because you have to live in that body, right? And now when you try to get into well, how bad is osteoporosis, or how bad will dementia be, or how bad will heart issues be, versus perhaps an early diagnosis of breast cancer of 95 to 99% survivability rates, that matrix, that cost benefit analysis, that doctor is like, I'm not here to talk about that. You have breast cancer and I know this pill will help you. End of story. Completely left-brained, myopic thinking, death by expert class.
Hello, I'm Jason, and you have successfully accessed the Intimate Discourse podcast. Nice one. This is episode 21, Doing Your Own Research, Part 2. If you haven't yet listened to Part 1 of this, fear not. There is no real prerequisite. These episodes stand on their own like 1980s television programming. Today we focus mainly on doing your own research in a medical context. I know what you're thinking. This is treading on fairly pernicious ground. After all, it's one thing to question where we get our news from, but quite another to challenge the advice of our doctor, a trained professional whose knowledge of physiology and medicine undoubtedly exceeds our own. But this whole do-your-own-research movement is itself a kind of science. There is a right way and a wrong way to do it. To do it right, one needs to build a structure around it, and its proper implementation instructs us on how we can optimally approach a problem in today's fast-paced, data-saturated world. A world where misinformation is rampant, and yet, perversely, trust in our institutions is at an all-time low. Advocating for doing our own research doesn't mean that we instantly discard whatever information we're getting from a so-called authoritative source. It means that we look deeper into the motivations behind such messaging and compare it with other sources of information we've collated from our own networks of trust through our own diligent study. It's a recognition of the fact that the objectives and best practices of a news organization, or a social justice movement, and yes, even a medical doctor, may not necessarily align with our own. It's an awareness that conflicting financial incentives, conflicting ideologies, or even just differences in temporal scope can lead the so-called experts to arrive at conclusions that are far afield from where we would have arrived at had we had all the information and been provided with all the angles. This is not to say that this is a perfect solution, but it is better than what we've been used to. We're living through an incredible point in human history, where our access to data far exceeds what we've had in the past. And so it hardly makes sense that we'd maintain the same old paradigms, even were our institutions not failing us so consistently. Doing our own research properly leverages this unprecedented access to data and cultivates a contextual understanding of that data, of any messaging or opinion or commandment from the mountaintop. Yeah, the idea here isn't to cast off authority altogether. It really isn't. Speaking for myself, I firmly believe we need institutions, we need professionals, the expert class, if you will. All the progress over the past centuries has afforded us, as a global society, the ability to specialize. And with this has come many of the advances we've seen, not just technologically, but also in our political apparatus, our justice system, our education system, etc. But as specialization breeds complexity, a lot of rather fundamental subject matters are becoming too arcane for the average person, and so an unhealthy reliance on the expert class has evolved. In some ways, it's time for all of us to become generalists again, at least to some extent. On the show today, we have a gentleman with us named Bob. He'll be detailing ways in which he applied his own research to medically assist two friends of his who were let down by their own doctors. This conversation does get a little technical, but only because Bob is fleshing out the exact steps he took to repair the issues with which he was presented, and because he is being as candid with us as possible. Bear in mind that Bob makes no claims here to be a medical doctor, and the following should not necessarily be construed as medical advice. Everyone's mileage may vary, after all. Seeing your family doctor is always a good first step when trying to determine what's wrong with somebody, or best practices for that matter. If you enjoy this episode or have any comments or criticisms you'd like to level at us, or any questions for Bob for that matter, as he has offered to answer any questions that anyone might have, please reach out to us at our email address at hello@intimatediscourse.com. That's hello@intimatediscourse.com. And please subscribe and share this podcast if you haven't already, and obviously if you enjoy it, or that you take something worthwhile from it. Either way, your support does mean a lot, sincerely. We strive to be skeptical, and we strive harder still not to be cynical. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Intimate Discourse. This is Jason. I'm here with Dimitri.
Hello, everyone.
And Bob.
Hello.
Who's our special guest today. Where should we start here? Bob, why don't I guess the first thing might be better for you to just sort of describe, who you are generally. I guess the main thing that we want to, Bob is on here today he did help some people with some issues that they had medically, and he sort of did it through this process of doing his own research and just giving them the help that they couldn't get otherwise through doctors, and they had seen doctors and specialists, and Bob was able to help them. And I guess we want to kind of delve into that, but first, maybe give a baseline of what you sort of do in your everyday and how, who you are. Well, you're not Bob, I know that much, but maybe just give everybody. And the reason that Bob is not Bob is because he's using a different name, and the reason he's doing that is because while everything he did, he didn't take any money for his the work that he did, and he didn't ever present himself as a doctor to these people who were friends of his, nevertheless, one has to be careful in this day and age to make sure that you aren't exposing too much online, and it's sort of, if you make yourself a target for certain people, it just kind of makes it easier for people who wish you harm to.
I'm going to say one thing, though, and I have a prediction, just having met Bob today. His not having a medical degree will be his superpower. It's going to that's what freed him. Let's see if we get there, but I think that's what freed him to actually get to these answers that otherwise he would have blinders on and never made it to.
Okay.
That's my prediction for today. Are we going to actually hit there? Because I think this is really key, really important. It's kind of like a Lorenzo's oil thing. If you apply yourself to the right problem and you have actually something vested on the results, and you go in completely unbiased, and you have a fair intellect and research skills, Bob will find the answer. Yeah.
Bob will find the answer.
Yeah, Bob, there you go.
It is the question that
you
must
don't need
find.
Google. Bob will find the answer.
Anyway, take it away, Bob. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm just a nerd. To put it simply, I'm a nerd. By the way, to your point about specialization is rife. I think it was Heinlein that said specialization is for insects. We're given spectacular faculties, and I think the vast majority of people just elect to waste them. Because I think we see life through this lens of things we have to do, and then when we look away from them, we look at things that just latently kind of waste our time, and we leak so much time that we don't actually realize how much time we throw away. I think everybody's capable of doing the kinds of things that, some of the things that I'm going to talk about, but I'm just a nerd, and I've always been a nerd because I liked reading even as a kid, and I liked learning. I think my earliest favorite memory is my parents bought me this set of encyclopedias, and I read through it one at a time, and I just memorized things because I liked those facts about things, and I just liked knowing stuff. And it was sort of a thing that I found out I was good at early on in my life, and I just memorized entire textbooks for.
And what could be more all-encompassing than literally an encyclopedia? It's literally the antithesis of specialization.
And And what could be more nerd-like than sitting down and going through an encyclopedia?
I was looking at the pictures.
But actually, I don't want to hover on something there that you said, which is this idea of leaking time. It's so, I can so identify with that. And you do see it with, I don't know, I look at my life and it's like, I mean, it sounds fairly trivial, but you wake up, I don't know, I wake up usually at a decent time. And then I kind of do a few things. Maybe I'm reading a little bit. I'll have a coffee, deal with the dogs. And it's like, by the next thing I know, it's like 2 in the afternoon. And it's like, what just happened? Like, and then it's like, okay, now I guess I'm just kind of getting ready for dinner in bed, like at this point. But it's like, yeah, the idea of, you always hear of, like, for example, Elon Musk. I'm absolutely baffled by how that guy is able to do so much. Like, it really, time management skills should be, the top taught course.
Do you know why in the
universities.
Army, the first task, the thing that I hated watching those 80s, like Platoon and movies like that, the first task they make you do when you get out, stand up in the morning, make your bed. And I was like, whoa, God. And the corners got to be crisp and everything. Like, it's like my ultimate nightmare as a child, and have someone yell at you, did you not make your bed correctly? And you'll stand there at the edge of your bed as they inspect it. But then I heard it explain to me why they actually do that. Because the moment you wake up, before you even take a step away from your bed, you've completed your first task. And once you've completed your first task, all the subsequent tasks come easier.
That was, I think that might have even been Richard on the show, that because he was in the Army.
Perhaps.
I seem to remember,
Maybe
or
we
maybe
went
we
through that
listened
one.
to it
Yes,
somewhere
yes.
else. I don't know. Maybe we listened to a lot of the same.
So
podcasts.
I always try to start my day by getting my first task out of the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it just momentum takes over after that.
Yeah.
I heard the Japanese have something like that. Like, they actually get up and the first thing they do is they clean the floors. And it's kind of like part of their culture. Like, you need to set the template for the day, sort of thing,
Well, they eat off the floors, so. But I'm not joking. They sit. That's not a
That'd be
joke. They just like, oh, we can still insult the Japanese,
eat
right?
off the floors or eat while sitting on the floor?
Well, they sit. Yeah, they sit on the floors to eat, right?
Sure. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Crumbs will fall where they may, but I like that process, because when I get to my own business every morning, I actually, even though I've cleaned it the night before, I always re-clean it in the morning again. It's kind of like a ritual.
Yeah. Ritual.
What I
rituals
catch
like
at
that
night
are
is not what I'm going to catch in the morning. So by looking at it with like evening eyes or morning eyes, you just kind of catch things differently.
good. Yeah. Okay. So okay. So in the vein of, so what happened? This first person who came to you.
Actually, I'll start with myself, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah. By all means, go ahead.
So at one point in 2018, I was working for a company, and I was quite busy working obscene hours, 12, 14, 16-hour days. And at one point, I started getting very sickly, and things weren't going so well. So I went for my blood tests, and I've always been a fan of looking at my blood tests. And what I found was my ferritin levels, which is basically your stored iron levels, were at about roughly 10x what they should be. So 75 is, give or take, the lowish number for men. 120 is considered like optimal, and mine were 748.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yep. And before,
So you're Iron Man, basically. Is this where this is going?
not the actually. If you have high ferritin levels, it causes hypercalcemia. So you get calcium deposits. It's the opposite of gout. It's pseudo gout, basically, and it's a terrible thing. You don't want that. You really don't want that. And for whatever reason, at that point, my heme was like, my hemoglobin was actually 60. It was around 160. Sorry, I don't remember every single one of my numbers anymore, because
Well, it would be bizarre if you
it's
could.
only be 8 or 10. Actually, with other people, like my parents and my ex-girlfriends and stuff like that, I remembered all their numbers. It was kind of like the thing that I did. It's like off the top of my mind, be able to look at a number and be like, okay, is this going up? Is this going down?
I have all my numbers written down too.
I don't have that
for my own blood work.
Yeah. I just remember those because it's helpful to kind of be able to. It's a nice gauge. And I went to the doctor and I kind of talked to him about it, and his answer was stop eating meat, right? Yeah. And there were a couple of other things, that were going on with me. I mean, my sugar was high, but the sugar was high because that's what I do when I'm stressed. I abuse sugar, which is something I've stopped since. But back then, I was abusing sugar, and it's an easy way to kind of get through the day. I think it's just a negative set of patterns that you fall into. You eat badly, you work long hours, you eat badly to feel good about yourself, and it goes into that whole leaking time. It's just leaking life at that point. And I think leaking wellness almost. I know it sounds like foo-foo to say that.
Well, it's like a battery and you're draining from multiple points.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there was this thing I read. It says you have a certain amount of willpower through the day, and you have to choose what to assign them to. And I think there's some credence to that, which is why the whole ritual thing is great, because then it doesn't become a willpower thing. It just becomes a schedule timetable thing. So you don't have to, it's the things you do without thinking that
You automate it.
Yeah,
for sure.
you automate it. So you don't have to assign willpower to it, right? It's a discipline. It's 10 o'clock. I should be in the gym, 10 o'clock at night.
And then over time, it becomes part of your character, your ethos. Like I am a, just to say, like you could say, I'm a health nut. So it makes it easier to walk past the Harveys and not stop, because health nuts don't stop at Harveys. And I'm a health nut. And you just, all of a sudden you block it off and move forward.
So, and things were getting pretty bad. Like at one point, I couldn't walk, so they gave me anti-inflammatories. They gave me indomethacin, which is a very potent NSAID, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And they're not so great for you. The doctor tells me, this thing is so powerful. And I don't remember the drug sheet on it anymore. It's just been too many years, almost 10 years now. And he said, basically, take it only when you absolutely have to, because this thing is rough on your body.
Oh, man, it's like the ring of power.
Yeah. So, I tried to figure out what was causing this, right? And I started doing my own research, basically, because don't eat meat is not an answer. I like eating meat. I've always enjoyed eating meat. One of my favorite dishes in the world is rice and meat. I still eat meat. I just don't eat rice anymore. I went carnivore some time ago, but we'll talk.
So he said don't eat meat because there's a lot of iron in meat, right? So there's a correlation.
But it's not. No. So there's this huge kind of. I also had high uric acid levels. Sorry, I forgot to mention. I had high uric acid levels, and so I had uremia as well, which does cause gout, right? So uremia is basically built of uric acid in your blood, and that causes deposition in your joints and in various places. In particularly bad cases, you get the white crystals, which is called tophi. But So the point is, like, I had multiple things that were going wrong. My sugar was high, my ferritin was high, my uric acid levels were high. So him saying don't eat meat was basically cut down the amount of protein that you're processing. And they say that even in heart disease patients, older heart disease patients, they say plant-based protein and all that kind of stuff. But really, there isn't any credence to that, because and we can get on that differently, because that's a whole other subject about, ACE blockers and ARBs and like proteinuria and all that kind of stuff, because that's the stack that kills the elderly, but that's a whole other conversation. But their answer was cover up the symptoms, and it's almost always Western medicine or medicine in general now in the last 10, 20 years, I see that it's just a cover up symptoms and hope it goes away, or provide sufficient wellness that the patient fucks off out of the clinic.
But isn't there, like, so for him looking at it and seeing like high iron levels, like if your iron levels are 10 times what they were originally, wouldn't it make sense for him to say, lay off the meat? Because that's where there's a big source of iron.
No, he should have told me to lose some weight. He should have told me to lose some weight. Realistically, look, and this I'm just saying that as just a general side. Almost everything is downstream from your sugar levels. If your sugar levels are ridiculously high, they put a lot of pressure on your body. And your body's too busy drowning in sugar to process normally. Your largest endocrine organ is your body mass, right? Like, and generally when your sugar is, mine was at 9.6 at one point,
high.
To 9.6. It was at 11 at one point. When you're generally overweight, you're generally, carrying a lot of fat around, and that's the thing that is causing the majority of your dysfunction. Almost everything, and there's papers that identify this separately, is one of the reasons why a lot of elderly people end up with dementia-like symptoms, and dementia itself is because it's downstream from diabetes.
Yeah, don't they call it type 3 diabetes these days?
I
I
don't know. I
believe.
haven't seen that.
Yeah. So yeah, I've seen that.
But
yeah.
basically, it goes kind of like this. High sugar levels will cause renal dysfunction, will cause liver dysfunction because you get NAFLD, you get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and then you get kidney dysfunction, you get CKD, chronic kidney disease, and then your EGFR goes to shit, and you end up leaking a lot of liver enzymes into your blood. And then what that causes is issues with your veins, causes microbleeds. Those microbleeds end up in your brain, and you start getting white matter damage. And it's basically this thing, and you can stop it simply. At any point, simply stop it by losing weight and stopping having sugar. But in this case, my issue, okay, the sugar was a thing, but I've always had higher than average ferritin levels, but never that bad. So it wasn't that it was just the sugar causing that. But I started reading around to trying to find a fix for this, because he was supposed to refer me to a hematologist, but that was going to take, a dog's age. And basically I couldn't wait around because I had to figure out what was going on. And I did, for a while, go on a very restricted diet. I actually, because of my uric acid levels, I cut down. I started only eating eggs, which is kind of, previous literature says that. And I do a salad, I do some cheese, I would do some quinoa, some very, very controlled diet. I got one of those little Asian bowls that they have.
So a little more paleo diet? Was that the general
Yeah. And I discontinued at one point even the quinoa, because I didn't want to have carbs.
The Q&A. That's what I call quinoa. Is that funny?
That is terrible.
But okay, so when you're saying, so what did you turn to? Because when was this? Oh, this is like 2018. So there's a lot of resources available on the internet and stuff like that.
But there wasn't anything. I found, it was funny. The thing that I found was an old Scientific American article on doping in cycling, of all places. And what these crazy cyclists were doing was they would take blood from themselves, store
re-inject it, right?
And re-inject it. Yeah. And what it was causing their iron levels to shoot to ridiculous levels. And I go, wait, that sounds familiar. That sounds like a thing I know. I know a guy who could use this, So, well, how do you fix it? And what they were doing is medically bleeding them. And I said, okay, I can do that. So I started going and giving blood. And at the beginning, the first time I gave blood, I felt better almost immediately. But then after a few days, it came back because, look, ferritin is just a effective packing structure for iron in your blood. So your body's just going to go, we're out of, hemoglobin. Our hemoglobin levels are low. And we're going to just... So there's this funny little graph in my Give Blood website, the Canadian Blood Organization. I can't remember what they're called. Where they actually show you charts of your hemoglobin over time. And so I give blood the first time, and the data point is at, it's like it was 160 and change, and then it goes up, and then it goes up again, and then it starts going down, and then it hit, normal levels. And at the same time, my ferritin evens out. And at the same time, I made diet changes and things like that and all that stuff. So I controlled my sugar, and, I got my sugar down to 5.5. Naturally, no metformin, no nothing. Actually, now my sugar is at 4.1.
And what do you attribute the sugar going down to most? You said diet?
Just diet, yeah.
Diet,
yeah.
Okay.
Just purely diet.
Yep.
You can do a straight carnivore. Right now, I eat I would say 99% carnivore diet. So like my most recent dish, I made 6 pounds of ground beef, for instance, and I put 4 potatoes. 4 small little potatoes. Yeah. And they're just there for like texture and, just so I don't like completely... Discipline and willpower are things, but there is a certain level where you kind of hit that, like, why do I live? It's like with that much.
I mean, I was going to say, are you enjoying what you're eating though?
You know what? I'll say this, kind of the last little while, I've been doing almost and one of my friends, he was having a really bad time. He was depressed and things like that. And, I was trying to get him on the diet, and food can become an addiction. Food generally is an addiction. And I think we lean on it too much. And as you do more and more of food as fuel, what you realize is that it really is meant to be just fuel. Because we kind of find it's easy, and this goes back to my whole point about leaking time, right? We leak a lot of like fulfillment and things like that to things that we don't need to put them into. It's very easy to assign, profound happiness and meaning to just eating.
What do you know of, I've heard this before, I might say it, but food doesn't actually give us energy. It's the ATP that gives us energy. Food is just nutrition.
Yeah, but ATP is, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But you burn, your body burns proteins, fats, carbohydrates. It's a choice what you want to burn, right?
So the choice part I'm going to is like, isn't it kind of, I'm just going to divert for a second, but isn't it interesting that every religious philosopher is usually somebody who doesn't eat a lot and is kind of skinny and almost does a certain type of intermittent or religious fasting, and that allows you then to get onto other habits and actually elevate yourself to another level. It's almost like, when you're eating of the world, you're more of the world. And if you actually want to sort of elevate yourself beyond that, which is the world, you need to also detach yourself from the addiction of food.
Addiction in general.
Some sort of way there, right?
But addiction in general, right? And it's kind of, when I was younger, I used to talk about like the consumer versus producer philosophy, right? So it's very easy. It's just, you can always look at your life as a function of things you consume, or you can look at your life as a function of things you produce, right? And it's easy to kind of give in to sensation. And I know I'm sounding super like new agey, or I really am not, I think it's very easy to fall into habits and let them define, because it's like a cigarette. So I used to be a smoker. And
you did everything bad.
Oh, I did, absolutely. I did cigarettes,
Sugar,
drugs,
smoking.
smokes. Yeah,
Who are you, Bob?
Just a nerd. Sorry, I lost my. Yeah. Oh, so from smoking a cigarette, the moment you stop smoking, within 7 minutes or something like that, you start thinking about a cigarette again. And that's food in a lot of people's lives. A lot of people, and I know this because I've seen this in friends and, my girlfriends and stuff like that, ex-girlfriends. They look at life between events. It could be meals, it could be weekends, it could be, sex, whatever. And that's a very dangerous way to live your life, because you won't notice, because you miss the distance between those points. But the distance between those points is the most important part of your day. And so if you don't look at food as like a sense of enjoyment or something, you just, I'm doing this because I gotta, you get a very different set of outcomes. Like right now, I'm on, personally, in a very black market way, I decided to supplement my GH levels, my growth hormones levels. And, at our ages, it's beneficial. It's not super physiological levels, but it's getting it higher than what it would be at that, at our age groups, right? And it's a marked improvement. But I'm testing it with an oral. It's called MK677, ibutamoren. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. No, I hope I'm saying the right one. Yeah. And it's a ghrelin mimetic, so it makes you hungry. But, people complain about it all the time. I don't notice it at all. I've taken it and sat there and gone, I don't really feel this. And I know the lab, and I know there's, like, I took the trouble to read their COA, the Certificate of Analysis, and I know it's a reputable lab, and I bought other things from them. And so I know the gear is not garbage, but I'm just not affected.
And what do you attribute that to?
It's just not giving a shit.
And what do you attribute that to?
The whole thing. You don't look at things as, your day is not the distance between your meal.
You've broken free from like the dopamine hit of food and stuff.
Right.
So how did you free yourself?
Well, I mean, it's a slightly longer answer, but it's, I think.
And if I could ask, how would you recommend someone else to free themselves? So you don't have to go into the super detail.
Yeah.
But like,
When I was born, my eyes were completely broken. And, I was mostly blind in one eye and slightly blind in the other. And so my childhood consisted of medical appointments and wearing a patch to school. I got picked on incessantly. And I couldn't breathe very well. I had asthma, so I was a sickly little child. I'm surprised I survived. And part of the reason why I survived is because I refused to give up. Years later, someone has called me a cockroach because I just refused to fucking die. And that's sort of...
Are you sure that's the reason they called you
Yes, I'm quite certain. In that context, absolutely. And, one of the things that I used to do as a child was my parents used to make me... We used to have this lake at the center of town where I grew up. My mom would follow me on her little scooter, and I would run every day, 5 kilometers. Every single miserable fucking day, I would run. And my mother would make me run, and I would run. And I had to run. And that was the only way. My parents made me run until I could breathe better. My parents made me do eye exercises until I could see better. And, there's this kind of metal that it builds in you. And I think that's what you have to have. Because at some point you look at the things around you and you think, do you want these things to own you? Whatever your habits are, they own you. Your food, your drink, whether you like alcohol. I've done drugs. I'll be very honest. I've done drugs. I have, partied excessively. At one point in my 20s, I was a functional alcoholic. As in, I would drink to the point that I was drunk every evening and then go to work the next day and be the kind of engineer that people called brilliant every single day. And I did that for a couple of years. And then one day I just said, no more. When I quit smoking, it's the same thing. I said, no more. When I was ready to quit, I left a carton of cigarettes on my desk as a test to prove to myself that I wasn't weak enough, that seeing the cigarettes, that seeing people smoke them in front of me or coming and bumming and say, hey, man, can I have a cigarette? And then pick up one and then go out.
So you were taught from a young age that the malleability of the human experience is real and lays in your own hands.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's just the thing that you have to want to do it.
Okay, I have a question. So because you made some pretty big claims here. It's one thing to say, I didn't, I kept the cigarettes there and I didn't have it, and that's a willpower thing. I understand that. But are you saying that you overcame asthma because you ran 5 kilometers every day, and that you, for example, did, eye exercises and you were able to see better?
So, look, so I was born with a lazy eye, right? So in the case of a lazy eye, what it is that one of your eyes, well, it wasn't just a lazy eye. There's a few more complications, but I don't want to go into all the identifying details. But I had a surgery. I'm not saying that it was magic and, unicorn farts. So there was surgery involved.
Right.
I had my first surgery very young in life. But after that, it did require, quite a bit of, just like you go to physio when you injure a body part. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with your eyes. If you have a lazy eye, you have a weaker eye, you patch. What they do is they patch the other eye, the dominant eye, it's called, and then they force that other eye to see. So you have to use it. So the exercises, one exercise, and I remember this one so clearly because I hated it so much. You have to thread a needle. So you sit there, you thread a needle, and then you take it out, and you thread it again, because it forces your eye to resolve that the hole of the needle with this thread.
Right.
And it's just like anything else. It's like,
So
training.
you optimized your outcome.
Yeah, but
yeah, you optimized your outcome, but you didn't. It was probably the surgery, right?
No,
you know what I mean?
80, maybe you're going to give it a percentage. Let's call it 75%.
Sure.
But that extra 25% comes from Bob.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's the same thing with running, right?
Yeah.
So, with running, it increases your lung capacity.
your
What is it?
VO2 max.
Your VO2 max, yeah. Your endurance training, that's what endurance training is. The ability to handle the buildup of lactic acid, the ability to store more energy. Why do you think that the vast majority of people actually take creatine for? Creatine is not like some drug. Creatine is basically the primary metabolite, to go back to, is ATP. Right? So you can't supplement straight ATP. So you cheat, you take creatine.
I've immensely dropped my propensity to asthma from doing Wim Hof breathing. the last 4 or 5 years, going through COVID and everything.
Yeah.
And then when you can lay there and hold your breath for 6 minutes, you're like, my lungs are pretty good. Right. And then you just you're in that generalized category.
Yeah. I think that this is part of what the disconnect is. Everybody, the attention span, like I'm listening to you talk and you're obviously very knowledgeable about this. And I think people's attention spans are such that, at some point it's like, look, it's very binary. It's like, okay, we have doctors on one hand, surgery, all the things that kind of society tells you need to do to get over some ailment. And then you have kind of the natural, like, do deep breathing, this and that, kind of like a little more, I don't know what's the word, like less scientific, or from that standpoint.
Well, it's not less scientific.
Less medically interventionalist.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe like that.
That's much better said. Yeah. But I think there really is that middle ground, right? And I think this do your own research is about kind of like melding the two together, because there is, the surgery certainly gets you there. It allows you to do those exercises, but
it's a starting point.
But here's the crux of the problem, going a little further out, scaling back a bit. How many doctors actually recommended to his family or me regarding asthma or any other ailment people have that you should also supplement with the natural route?
Right.
You don't get that ever. No,
you get
how many people recommended Wim Hof for you, right?
0.
Yeah.
And my wife is going through things now too. 0, know, and there's all kinds of small, not really well-funded studies that will show you that you can actually get even better results than what the sick care system's giving you versus actual health care. But there's no, first of all, the doctor is not going to get financially compensated by recommending you do muscle movements for your eyes. And secondly, if it's something preventative, if they tell you, walk 5 kilometers a day, you'll avoid heart disease in the future. Well, there's also nothing to say, congrats, the thing I told you that if you do, you won't get, you didn't get because of the thing you did. Like you're not going to get that incentive, and you avoided the big thing. So there's not an incentive early in terms of financial compensation, and there's nothing to say, congrats, doctor, you actually did something to help save my life.
Well,
because they'll never be able to attribute it to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, in our earlier Do Your Own Research episode about your statins and how you went in with high cholesterol, and then and it was like you should be on statins, and then you're like, whoa, like
why?
Yeah. And then you change your diet. And
and also my point to something like that is that if you're going to be starting a journey on statins, which will be more or less for the rest of your life, and you're starting it, let's say at the average age of 40 or 50, before you commit to a drug for half a century, I think you got 18 months to 2 years to try to crack it yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Because if not, then once you start it, you start it. So at least see what you can do to move it. Even if you move it a little bit, it's like compounding interest. You just get better and better and better at it, right? So that's another problem too. A lot of these more natural methods are slow to build momentum. But once you get there, it's like food today. We're poisoning ourselves, but not immediately. Nobody goes to McDonald's and just drops dead. But you do that for 30, 40 years, you end up with a completely different endpoint. And it's the same when you do the natural method. You're not going to be all of a sudden better tomorrow. Do it consistently over an entire lifetime. You can be a completely different endpoint.
Do you think, and actually, Bob, my question to you as well is, somebody who is, so for example, my age, is this something that, say they wanted to do a 180 and just be like, you know what, from now on, I'm going to be very vigilant about this. I'm going to make sure my health is, I'm researching what I'm doing, eating the right things, etc. Is there a point, is it sort of too late for me, or is this something you need to start with? Well, I don't think you are, but I appreciate the
I think I am.
Implied flattery.
Well, it's what I know. There's a ton of research lately on neuroplasticity. Like you can literally have dementia, and with the correct interventions like omega-3s and vitamin D and stuff, not only slow down the progression, but begin to reverse it.
Actually, with the dementia, one of the things, and I found this when I was doing some other research, is dementia patients are overwhelmingly have high levels of homocysteine in their blood.
What do you find? Tell me what homocysteine is.
Wait a second. This is a clean podcast. I'm sorry.
Homocysteine. It's
I didn't bring my flag. I'm just having fun. Please,
all right, go ahead.
For us and for our audience, tell us what homocysteine is.
Homocysteine is a metabolite, and I don't remember all the chemistry of it anymore because
just generalize. Like, what are you aiming at here?
It's a blood marker you could test for.
Okay.
And actually, there's a study that says if you take vitamin B, and there's proportions, specific proportions. I no longer remember that. I will look it up and I'll send it to you because I know that this exists. But just a generalized vitamin B complex in a very specific percentage, like a
range.
Yeah, it actually helps out with that.
Yeah, I know. You can take all the the sick care statins and every other type of drug to make your blood biomarkers look correct.
No, you can't. It doesn't fix anything.
Exactly. But it doesn't say anything about your cellular health.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you end up at 65 with some sort of cancer going, but all my numbers are great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not talking about your mitochondrial health, your cellular health, any of that sort of stuff.
Right.
So again, it's just masking the deeper issues.
I made a joke to a friend of mine recently. His family was trying, like, this is the friend I was telling you about, the one that's unhappy and he's not doing so well, is kind of depressed. And I got him on a carnivore diet, which is great. So, and he's doing better.
Well, what percentage of depression can be fixed just from good diet and exercise?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, you're going to get far more profound effects than any kind of pill, right?
No,
if you need the pill on top of it later, c'est la vie. But at least get the foundation down.
Right. But depression is just an allergic reaction. It's like going back to what we were talking about earlier. Depression is an allergic reaction of going between point to point. Like, if you keep talking about life as like, I'm going between these two events, and you start looking at life as the distance between, I went on a date to I ended up in a relationship. I'm just using an example. Or, I felt great spending time with this girl to I felt great spending time with this girl to I went for this good meal. And you see, you're externalizing everything about yourself. If you start looking at life as a set of external circumstances, you're always going to be miserable. If you start looking at that differently, then you'll be less depressed.
But it's like checkpoints.
I'm not saying all of it can, all brain chemistry problems can be fixed, but you have to have some willingness to, look at it. You're not some leaf on the wind. You're not just at the mercy of the gods.
I want to check you for a second because
Sure.
I think that I think part of the problem with this conversation of doing your own research kind of goes to when you make a statement like that. Like, I don't think that depression, like people who actually have, because the word is thrown around a lot, but people who actually have like clinical depression, it's not like they're looking at, they don't have like, it's not a point A to point B thing. It's not, they're externalizing their world and therefore they're,
I can speak from my experience.
I know, but that's the thing. If you're making a general assumption about that, like there's people like you can say whatever you want about why the serotonin levels are off and why, like, whatever it is about the brain chemistry, maybe there's different ways that it gets there, et cetera, over time. But there are people who I know that have like clinical depression when they're actually depressed or they don't take their meds, they're like fucked. Like, they're like, they can't get out of bed. Like,
those particular people, would you say anecdotally, when you look at their lives are being run in a healthy way?
No, but I mean, like, and using somebody that I know as an example, like, they were fine, very big achiever, like, and then they literally just, one day it was like everything kind of shut down and they became very depressed and they didn't go to, medical school. They didn't do this and that. And that was, and it sort of started there. And like, now I can look and be like, yeah, they're not running their lives in the best way, but it's like, there was like, that's because they've been depressed for like 20 years. And, it takes some juggling to get the right medications. And again, it's not all or nothing. Like, there's some truth to what you're saying, even for these people. But it's like, I think that when you make sweeping comments like that, like I hear that sometimes with you read it on Twitter and stuff like that, where it's like people will make these kind of grandiose
just rub
comments.
Some dirt on it, bro. Yeah, I get it.
You know what I mean? So
that is the standard.
And it's not so then somebody is quick to kind of like, oh, that's just a bunch of bullshit. I'm going to go back to my state authorized
I'm not trying to say that at all. And listen, I got put on depression meds when I was in university, which, I got a full scholarship to a Canadian university. We won't name it for obvious reasons. And, it's realistically, and they sent me to see a shrink. And, he said, the thing that you do when you feel out of control of your life is you lift heavy things, you work out. I was like, okay, but how is this a bad thing? I run like a crazed greyhound and I lift heavy things. How is this? This is the only thing that actually makes me normal right now. And, it's like, yeah, but here's some meds. And I'll be honest, I've abused Celexa. I found, and this is funny, we won't ask and answer why I found this, but I found that snorting Celexa made me ultra productive, which at a certain point in my life, when I was working for a particular company, was very much of interest to the people I worked for. And I did that. And I did that for a while. So, like I said, I abused drugs. And, but you can screw with your brain chemistry that way. There are other ways to screw with your brain chemistry also.
But are you saying, so as I get to know you and hear your story here, that you've come to where you are now in life because you've literally tried pretty much 100% everything the opposite direction, and it didn't really wield the results you were looking for?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I did. I'll be very honest. I went through, in my 20s, I had a situation with my eyes. And, what I found is the medical establishment gives very little of a shit. I think the big thing for me with figuring out how much the medical establishment doesn't really care is I remember going to emergency. I was having some issues with my vision, and the vision in my right eye was cloudy, which is a profound issue for me, considering my right eye is my dominant eye still, in spite of the surgery and the unicorn farts and all the exercises. My left eye isn't up to scratch. It's not. If I lost my right eye tomorrow, it would be a significant detriment to my life and my functioning overall. And I told the ER person that after I had been waiting for 6-7 hours at that point, and I said, listen, I can't really, my vision's getting cloudy, something's wrong. And she said, oh, that's okay. I said, she goes, oh, so you still have the other eye? I said, well, what? I said, that's a little bit of a problem. I said, they come in a pair because you need both of them. Are we going to expect me to come back when I need a seeing eye dog? Is that when we take it?
This is what they said in ER too.
Yeah, in ER.
ER in Canada lately, I have the same experience.
This was 17 years ago.
It is the pit. Yeah.
Right.
So I said, listen, and she goes, there's no cost to talk to me like that. And I said, no cost to talk to you like that. I said, okay, no problem. I said, how about this? You give me your details, and I will contact, the Toronto Star or whatever. And then, we'll have a different conversation. I said, you can have a conversation with the paper, because, if your answer to me is you can still see out of one eye, then maybe, we have bigger problems here. And it was funny because I managed to magically, quickly after that, get a referral to a doctor in the morning, an ophthalmologist. And it turns out I had a bacterial infection in my eye. Mm-hmm. So they had to give me, the same kind of bacterial drops that they give post-surgery, because there's something going on. And bacterial infections in your eye, they can blind you. So, if I hadn't been, particularly spicy, I would say, about my,
It's really unfortunate, but because you do want to be polite and you understand the pressure they're under, and the fact that they've studied so long and have attained a certain status, and be like, well, you're the expert, you tell me. And then you realize the financial incentives, personal faults of humans, the stress they're under, and all that sort of stuff. You're like, no, you actually have to, unfortunately, push back a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're not advocating for yourself in 2024 in at least Canadian medical, the Canadian healthcare system, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Like, I will debate any doctor on COVID, and you know what? I'll win, and it's because I know my shit about it. And I sit there and I talk to them, and if I mention a study on masking or a study on ivermectin or a study on any of the topics, they simply don't know the studies.
But
so
you know what?
They're busy. They're in their little myopic niche. They have a mortgage for a $5 million house to pay for. They want to play golf. And they simply like, well, I do enough of a good job to not get fired. And that's about it.
Yep.
So hitting it with a generalized, broad view perspective, but with a sort of myopic thrust of your engines to get to an answer, I find like in any conversation, and we went now through the same thing with my wife, and I'm asking questions on efficacy and mortality rates. And when you start said treatment, does it change anything? One oncologist looks at me. He's like, are you a medical researcher? You're asking very good questions. I haven't thought about it like that. And at the end of the meeting, my wife turns to me and goes, you know what, Dimitri? If 1% of people simply ask the questions you were asking, they would have to change the way they tell the information to the patient.
But you know what? And this is again the disconnect between the people. A lot of people I'm sure we all know in certain generations, or just the average person is going to listen to, for example, you make a comment to your doctor about COVID or challenge him on an article you read, and the thought is like, oh, so he reads one article, now he knows everything about medicine. But it's like, but the thing is, your doctor is dealing with, this large array of, he's trying to keep on top of everything and trying to keep his practice going. There's no way he can get into the minutia of
and liability.
Actually,
right, and that's a big one.
I'm going to point this out. Lots don't even. So there's a recent case. I had an ex-girlfriend that I was dating, and she, in her misspent youth, decided that she was going to get her breasts augmented, and she got them augmented. Actually, it's funny. It's a very sad story, unfortunately. In her 20s, so she didn't like the way her breasts looked for her own sake, and she was profoundly unhappy about it. She had self-esteem issues around them and things like that. And she went for just a lift. And the doctor upsold her to get breast implants. And they do hundreds of thousands of these every year, just in North America alone. I think it's a ridiculous number. It's just 300,000 or something like that. But don't quote me on the exact number. It's in the hundreds of thousands, give or take. And he sold her on them. She got them. Now, here's the sad part. So she gets them. As soon as she goes home, she has a violent allergic reaction to them. She ends up with capsular contractures. She ends up with swelling. She ends up with all kinds of unhappiness. Now, realistically, you put something in your body, you get an allergic reaction, you take it the fuck out. Not in this case. They left them in. They left them in for 17 years. During that 17 years, they got recalled. Nobody contacted her about the recall. And they were recalled for what? Leaks. Now, that's not the only problem. She gets them, and eventually she gets psoriasis. Well, what do you think? These are not connected? But how do we fix psoriasis? Well, psoriasis, you give corticosteroids. And, that's...
To reduce the inflammation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You reduce the inflammation and you cover it up, right? And then they started doing, there's this pulse laser treatment. And she used to always tell me, oh, we do the pulse laser and it goes away. I said, that's not how your body's supposed to work. And actually on the first date that we went out, I said, your face. I said, you've had it for a long time, the issues. And I go, that's an immune condition. It's not a dermatological condition. Yeah. It's an immune issue manifesting on your skin, on your face. And I said, I'm going to fix it. And so one of the things I proved to her quite early in the cycle of us dating was that she had BII, breast implant illness. And basically what had happened is for 17 years, she had a profound allergic reaction to her implants. And one other thing that happens if you get breast implants sometimes is if the surgeon is an incompetent hack, what you end up with is biofilm. And this happens with implants. So, you end up with bacteria that adhere to the implants. And it's almost always, and I bet her money actually. I said, you have staph and Pseudomonas because those are the two most common bacteria that occur in hospital environments. And guess what showed up in her path report? Staph and Pseudomonas. So for years, she had staph and Pseudomonas in her body.
And nobody had done a blood panel test for these two things in 17 years or so.
No, they did blood panels, but this is biofilm. It's on the...
Okay.
It's on the implant itself.
Okay, so you have to request that
your body can't... It's outside of a biopsy, I think. You can't actually identify that you have that. But then the only answer is removal. You can't, because
sorry to cut you off. How did they find those two things in? What was the mechanism you used?
They took it out.
They literally took it out.
Yeah, because I convinced her to get them out. Okay. I convinced her to get them out.
And while taking it out, they checked it for like a biopsy, and then they found those two. Okay.
I found her a surgeon that basically did, that actually specialized in making sure that women who had implants who suspected that they had BII would get them, like he did that, he had the whole process. There's a process. You get the implants out, you send them to the lab for testing, you send the tissue out, you do the whole 9 yards, right? To make sure that, hey, is there anything else? And that's exactly what they found, which is that she had a biofilm issue. Now, how else did this manifest? She had breathing issues. Guess what they did? They gave you corticosteroids. I said, you're on inhaled corticosteroids. Inhaled corticosteroids will eventually cause dysbiosis, which means that she had stomach issues, she had digestive issues, and she has a host of other issues because one asshole upsold her so he could make a few extra grand, so he could send his kids to a Ivy League school.
So this is where the
and buy another Porsche.
This is where the alignment of incentives is way off in Western medicine.
Right. But it's even kind of, the whole thing is when she went back to the guy, to the original surgeon, and I won't mention names, she went to the original, he's upselling her again on getting them replaced because he says, well, you haven't had kids yet. You should wait until you have kids. And then, you should get them out after motherhood and then you can just get the mommy lift. So it's like an upsell into an upsell into an upsell.
What's happening here, I think, is mostly is that he's following it like a hierarchical structure, like the military. And as long as the top down is telling him this is the next thing you can do and you're okay if you do it because the peer-reviewed journals say this is now the newest thing and safest thing, as long as he's got the green light from there, he's going to sell it. What you're doing is blowing that up by going in, I don't care for your hierarchy. I'm going to do my own research and tell you exactly what's going wrong.
Right. But the thing is, it's the Hippocratic Oath, right? First, do no harm. If a patient comes to you, if you're an engineer, and I've been doing engineering for a long time, when you bring me an engineering problem, you tell me what's broken and I fix that. And that's all I care about. And one of the things I've taught people that I've mentored, and I've been at companies where, I've been handed, a product portfolio and people go, this is broken, make it work, It's either too slow, it doesn't work right, it doesn't do the things that customers want, whatever. Insert problem definition here. But the first thing to do is you have to identify the root cause. You have to say, let's figure out what is,
Yeah, but there's no motive for him to do that.
It's a person.
I know, but he's been in this system for so long that he's not incentivized to think in a moral-based way.
The Hippocratic Oath.
Well, what happened during COVID was the Hippocratic Oath.
Okay, but
I mean, literally every major doctor on earth, with the exception of like 30 or 40 people, all followed the hierarchical structure. If you're going to do that during a pandemic, forget about breasts.
But I would ask, isn't there something to the most good for the most people? Like if you have a mandate that's coming down from NIH or whomever, you can't customize it that much.
I think that's true in almost all cases, with the exception that the most good for the most people. So public health is going to have to come up with a solution that's good for the average person because they're in charge of keeping the army on the battlefield, which would be their citizens. I get it. But in the DuckTales of that statistical curve, you're going to have a lot of nuance. And what he's asking for now, Bob, is nuance in the ex-girlfriend's case.
Right.
Can you look at her, 1% failure rate and actually give a solution specific
it's a lot
to
more
her?
than 1%. Breast implants actually were taken off the market at one point by the FDA because of the number of incidents of breast implant illness. They actually covered up the breast implant illness thing. And it's interesting because at one point, I went and I found the breast implant illness matrix. It's in PubMed. And I helpfully colored in yellow highlight all the symptoms that she had reported that were on that matrix. And I can tell you, short of about 5, she matched every single one of the...
So to Jason's point, even though you're talking about Jason, well, we need to do the most good for the most people. It's an awesome philosophy overall, and I'm sure that's what the doctors are told they're doing. But when you actually dig into the research, they very well aren't.
Yeah, exactly. Because the realistic thing would be that every woman who goes in and says, I want to get my breast implants done, should be first shown this matrix, shown exactly what can go wrong, shown that you can end up on inhaled corticosteroids, which are profoundly terrible for you, such that, so there's only flucosinate furoate, flucosinate propionate, and budesonide. I think those are the only 3. Those are the only 3. And they all have different levels of effects. And I maybe uncharitably so, used to say to her, I said, oh, that's great. I should get my tits done too so I can stop breathing again.
But this is the thing. Like comparing COVID, to which was a pandemic, to this. I mean, this is an elective surgery, right? Like, so
so let's talk about COVID. So I'm game for that. Do you know one of the greatest causes of death during the Black Plague was? It was the stupid fucking masks that they kept wearing everywhere.
Oh yeah, and you can go back to malnutrition and all sorts of things of that nature too. Yeah,
but crowding, dirty conditions and all those kinds of stuff. That's what was causing it. Now here's the thing: during COVID, let's talk about if you wear a mask, and I know I'm not a doctor, so I can't, but I understand filters and filtered objects. What is the relative size of a virus to a cloth mask?
Yes, of course. We know it's going to break through. We've had a very long podcasts about that. But.
So I think overall, generally speaking, like I guess my point is, I understand again with COVID, like I understand the top down. This is the best practices. Roll this out. This should save the most.
And why is it an mRNA vaccine? Why not old school vaccines?
Let's put this aside for a second. So like, so they roll out this plan. Now, somebody who doesn't want, I mean, again, we've kind of covered this in several episodes, but like if I decide, well, I don't want to get the vaccine, I have another way I'd like to approach this. I was a little more cautiously or whatever, given my age and my general health. But the problem I had with COVID was the censorship and the societal uptake of this message.
Well,
where
that's
it's
all
like
part of
you're a
the
villain if you don't
generalized
take it.
matrix that goes behind all this. If you go into that route, you're going to get into who funds the public health regulators. You're getting into like just that is a huge matrix. But keeping it like on just simply on a health level, in talking about your standard distribution curve, we knew very well you will not find a healthy child on Earth that died of COVID.
Yep,
not
because
one.
they're profoundly high levels of ATP.
Yeah, not one. You will find sick kids who died of COVID, but they die of COVID at lesser rates than of the flu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
under 19. Yeah. So the public health response model, when you actually break it down to the nuance, doesn't hold. It's an awesome philosophy, and every doctor you meet will say that's what we did. The greatest good for the greatest number of people sort of thing. And you're like, no, you didn't. You actually pushed a drug onto people that had no business taking it. And if you wish to offer it, go ahead. But if you're going to say you can't go to Tim Hortons camp because you haven't had 3 shots and yet for children, it's absolutely abhorrent.
Well, yeah,
immoral, abhorrent, financially incentivized,
travesty
of human rights. And so that same framework is what Bob is talking about when it comes to breast implants. It's literally a framework of thinking that needs to be defeated.
Oh, and just to finish that up, because so the moment she took out, so she had moments of confusion, anxiety, and all those kinds of things. And you know what that comes from? That comes from inflammation. And that was the thing I was talking about. So, earlier on you said, the doctors keep up. Doctors don't keep up. I'll explain to you why. So there are some tests that you do for immunoglobulins, IgA, IgE, IgM, IgG, right? So if you have IgE, very high levels of IgE, it's a absolute marker that you are under profound allergic reaction. That's what happens. And there's this really fun thing you can do with IgE, because when you have food allergies, and this a lot of people don't know this, and I showed off to her, she liked mushrooms. And every time she ate mushrooms, her stomach hurt. So once we went out, we took her for mushrooms, took her for omelets, and she had the mushrooms and everything. And she goes, my stomach hurts. I said, okay, let's go to the health food store. I got 2 supplements. One is berberine, and the other is green tea extract.
I take both daily.
Okay. Don't take green tea extract on an empty stomach, because it's extremely it's liver toxic. It has its own page on liver tox, if you've ever read that. The fact that I know that there's a website called Liver Tox is hilarious and nerdy. But EGCG is the compound. That's what is in green tea extract. And I gave her them, one berberine and 1 green tea extract. And she said, my pain's gone, like within 15, 20 minutes. I said, yeah. Because what green tea extract and berberine does is that they bind to the FC epsilon receptor, and it's the same thing that IgE uses, and it's basically what causes the food allergy for your body to recognize the food allergy.
How long would it usually have lasted without her taking those?
Oh, it would last the length of the digestive process. But this way, it goes away immediately. You probably take berberine for glucose control, and then green tea extract. I don't know for what you
The
take.
same sort of idea.
Oh, okay. You should try glycine. Glycine is better. And you can take glycine before meals, and then you can take it multiple times. So you take about an hour before every meal, and it's excellent.
Excellent, cool.
Yeah.
You guys are so far ahead of me in terms of this stuff. Like, I just, I thought
COVID for me was the most, like the greatest thing that could have happened, because I had a year off without work, which has its negatives financially. But how do you fill that time and space?
Learn.
Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You're going to inhabit it with something. You're going to put more you into the equation. It was like really like moving up the pyramid of some sort of mental hierarchy sort of thing, right? And so it's like sort of like fight or flight. I'm going to learn, spend my time learning. And you can find incredible resources online these days. And then you might be N equals 1, but you test on yourself and you do your blood panels and you see results. Just like losing 5 pounds. And when you see your triglycerides drop and your HDLs go up and your blood sugar come down, and you're like, so just LDLs are the last thing? My next thing when I go to my doctor is be like, if my LDLs are still a little high, what is my overall metabolic health? They're not going to really be able to answer that.
Yeah.
where do you start? So like you're both knee deep in this, obviously. Where do you go? Like, how does somebody start? I always hear things about the gut and this and that. Like, where do you focus at the beginning? Like, how do you start to build that journey into knowing more about taking care of your health?
Diet. It's always
No,
about
but
diet.
he's asking, like, do you go onto Twitter? Do you go into PubMed? Do you
No,
do
no.
YouTube?
Both. Like,
I don't really. You define a problem in your head, and then you go and you start looking at. So let's say you want to control your sugar.
No. Okay. Well, let's start. Even take it back from there. Where am I starting? So should I start with diet? Is it like, okay, like let's go to the food groups and everything like that?
There's
like,
no food groups. There's just meat.
Okay.
Protein.
What's a good book to start, or what's a good site? Like, again, I'm not going to dive into PubMed and like what's
No.
you know what I mean?
I think so. There's this guy, Sean Baker, MD. He's a pretty good guy on Twitter. He's on Instagram. He's the big guy who's pushing the carnivore diet. And he's 56, man. He looks better than I do. Okay, and the dude's pushing himself, like he's deadlifting, 400 pounds, 20 reps, kind of thing. So he built a company called Rivero, but he's just a guy who's talking about like the benefits of.
So you find your one sort of guru you trust, and then
no,
you let it
I don't trust on
cascade out of
gurus at
there?
all. I don't trust
No,
gurus.
but I meant like this sort of man. By guru, I mean like somebody you look up to, you feel like it's got valid research. Because that's what I find. You start with the one, and then they end up interviewing people on podcasts who are part of the same circle, and the whole matrix sort of just expands from there. And you'll find the ones that seem to resonate with you or prove themselves valid and reliable over time with their information.
And that's sort of what I've done with news, like with like how I get my news now. That's the path I've taken, where it's like expanded, and now there are people, there's whole networks of people I trust, and maybe I'll rate their truths a little higher, and then I'll do my own investigation to verify it.
One is a very special number, because once you find that one, then you start to cascade up. When you don't have that first contact point, you're like in the Amazon with a machete in your hand. You don't know which way
and
to
it's
go.
overwhelming. And I can see somebody listening to this and hearing you talk, Bob, especially, where it's just like it's very technical, it's very precise, and people at some point are going to be like, it's too difficult, I'll go back to, you know what I mean? Like, I wish there was a way to like it makes sense. I for the record, like, believe in what you're doing. I just I'm trying, I'm playing a little devil's advocate for some of the stuff, but it's like, I totally believe in what you're doing. I believe that this is the right path, this kind of doing your own research in combination with, because there's a way of doing it. I think that people in the past have like done their own research, and, people have this impression that it's somebody Googling like, cancer, and then like looking up the first cancer link. It's like,
you have to learn to ask yourself
like,
why.
St. John's wort or
It's
something.
critical reasoning skills first and foremost. That's your foundational part. Asking the right questions, understanding how to like frame it logically. And then in my experience, if you put 6 months into researching online and then sit down with the relevant specialist doctor and start referencing the things you know and asking questions, the amount of questions you're asking, they are not accustomed to. And now they're on the back foot.
Right.
You ask efficacy or durability or something, and they're like, what? People don't normally ask these things, man.
Well, what kind of response do you get from them when you ask these things?
Profound irritation and indignation.
Or in the one instance of the oncologist, a smile, and at the end he shook our hands and said, whichever path you take, just know you caught it early and you're going to be fine. Which then I turned to my wife and said, he said everything without saying it. What they're selling, you don't need to take. And he can't say that. He can't, because he's part of a marketing machine. At one point he bragged, and I won't get into the types of treatments, but he's like, everybody, 100% of the time, I will get them to do this treatment. And we didn't do it. And he shook our hands at the end and gave us that nice compliment.
Talking about the machine, do you know that, and I know this because, I was doing fertility research when an ex-girlfriend was around, there's a possibility that we were, thinking about having kids and whatnot. And I found that one of the first things they give you when you go for IVF is letrozole. Okay. Letrozole is a breast cancer drug.
Okay. So they're playing with your hormonal levels?
Yeah, but there's other ways to do it. So, and just going back to the earlier thing when I was talking about the IgE tests and things like that. So in the 17 years that this girl had her breast implants, nobody had actually done her immunoglobulins. Nobody had done an SBP test or anything like that, just to see, hey, what's going on in your body? And in a different case, there was supposedly a guy who's called the top immunologist in Toronto, who says that there's no benefit to looking at immunoglobulins to correlate them with specific outcomes on your body, with a flare. And that's the equivalent of a mechanic telling you that your fucking engine showing a red overheating sign has nothing to do with the fact that your fucking car is slowing down, that you can't drive it right, or that your pressure
is where they get into such myopic, overly nuanced detail that they miss the what's the expression, the forest for the trees sort of thing. And you're like, can you just step back a little bit and see what's actually happening here?
It's just a machine.
And they don't.
Yeah.
They truly don't.
Yeah. So in that case, we did her immunoglobulins. Her immunoglobulin comes back her IgE comes back as 960. I go, this is ridiculous. So I start her on berberine and green tea. And that's actually one of the reasons why berberine green tea is a big thing. And, told her exactly how to take it. Her immunoglobulin E fell by 200 points in less than a month. And it correlated exactly with improved breathing, less confusion, less inflammation in the head, obviously, because she wasn't anxious all the time. She could think clearly. Her skin cleared up a little bit. And then to prove that I was 100% right about this, the moment she took out her breast implants, within 2 days, she could breathe easily. By the time she was healed from the surgery, she could breathe. She could think straight. Her skin cleared up. Now it's been so many months past that, we're no longer together, but
controlling your blood work overall and getting rid of all the inflammation and allergic sort of responses that create inflammation. It's got to be like the most foundational thing, and nobody talks about it.
But the thing is, you can't just press the levers. You have to understand what the sort of the genesis of the problem is, right? A lot of people. I'll give you an example. There's a guy on my team, and he was always in poor health, and I couldn't, I asked him. I said, "So what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm on these antibiotics." For what? Folliculitis. Folliculitis is an external condition. They give you broad spectrum because you can have, a systemic thing. But have you ever taken just hydrogen peroxide and swabbed the parts where you have folliculitis? No one ever told me. You should try that. Okay. Goes off, tries it. And I said, do me a favor, stop taking the antibiotics. Because he comes back, skin's cleared up, generally better. I explained to him all the side effects of that particular antibiotic. I can't remember if it was on azithromycin or it was on some particularly strong broad spectrum antibiotic. And then I said, okay, well, he says he still has some problems. I said, okay, you got to do some levels. His vitamin D was so low that he was getting liver damage. He had the same fibrous damage as I had when I was starting to get cirrhosis because I was drinking 12, 14 beers a day. This is a boy who never drinks, he's in his 20s.
Yeah.
And so, And then they say, oh, well, you have the same liver damage as an alcoholic. Are you sure you're not an alcoholic? No, I'm not an alcoholic. So start getting his vitamin D levels better, all that kind of stuff. And they want to give him seraglitazar. Seraglitazar is a phase 2 drug that seeks only to control the liver enzyme levels in your blood. How about actually fixing the liver, as opposed to sticking your foot on the pedal? Well, the patient's still breathing. We need to hold his head under the water some more so it stops breathing. It's.
Yeah, it's. Have you guys seen that Netflix TV show of Matthew Broderick, Painkiller? It's on the true story. I think it's just 6 episodes. I only saw the first episode, but it's based on the true story of the OxyContin.
Oh yeah. The opioid crisis. The Sackler family, I think.
I believe, but they changed the names inside because they called it Purdue, the company, instead of whatever is the main company. But it really gives you a good insight of just how nefarious. And, we're not going to call it painkiller. We'll call it pain relief. Meanwhile, it's like heroin wrapped up in a slow time capsule. And you get it for back pain. And next thing you know, you're addicted. Yeah. Right. So for me, that in a nutshell is exactly, unfortunately, like the largest criminal fines in American history are to the pharmaceutical companies. Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're just told to blindly trust. To your point, why is it an mRNA vaccine for COVID all of a sudden? Mm-hmm. Really? A new pathogen that shuts down the world for the first time, and voila, comes a brand new novel intervention? Like, it doesn't take much for your...
It's a new delivery method.
It doesn't take much for your brain to be like, what the hell? The probability of the shutdown and a new intervention at the same time are highly unlikely.
Well, they developed the new intervention prior to...
Never tested on mass, though.
mRNA has failed in every single clinical trial ever. I would rather take CRISPR for erectile dysfunction in my 60s, okay?
So I'll just tell a recent story, if I may, that I've sort of had, and it's not... It just, a lot of what you're both saying and my experiences, and I just think it's... This whole doing your own research thing has been something that has been nagging at me for a while, and more as the years go by, and especially during COVID, I've noticed this. It's kind of like there is an established set of procedures that the medical establishment have. It's, they're aiming to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, and there's a lot of harmful incentives built into the process as well. And I don't know, coming from an outsider looking at it, all I know is there's been a lot of cases where had somebody been advocating for themselves and have been look, if you're not going in and not kind of fully armed with knowledge, if you're going in and just going to a doctor and okay, doc, I'm here, what do I have, and then kind of taking whatever they say without checking anything or without kind of logically thinking through things, then you're doing yourself a real disservice. So I have I have a family history of glaucoma, and this has always been a concern for me because I'm also short-sighted. So I think to myself, well, maybe I'm going to get it one day, and I want to kind of make sure that I keep that. I'm kind of on top of that. So I recently last year made an appointment with an ophthalmologist, and they kind of tested and they're like, no, your pressure is good, but it is kind of like getting to the point where maybe you want to come in and do like a baseline so where you're at, and then we can measure it the following year and see if it's rising or anything like that. Mostly precautious. So I'm trying to be again like kind of get ahead of anything. Now I also have by all available metrics like a fairly rampant ADHD. So like I can focus if there's a task I'm really enjoying, or like I'm in a conversation I'm really enjoying. I'm all about it. Like I can really dig into it. But if I'm in something where I'm not completely consumed, my mind wanders. I'm thinking of 100 different things, and I'm easily distracted. Like, and a lot of this is just the age we live in. But but one of the things with ADHD medication is almost all of it, or maybe all of it, you shouldn't take if you have glaucoma. Like for whatever it is, I don't know. It's maybe higher pressure. If
You're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, right. So I said to the ophthalmologist, so I have like I do take ADHD medication. Is this something I shouldn't do because of this glaucoma? And she's like, well, you don't have glaucoma. And I said, okay, but is there basically it's like this. Like I can force myself to be to concentrate more, right? Like I'm just easily distracted. Like this ADHD thing, it's like, okay, I believe there's something there, but it's like it's kind of self-induced in many ways, right? Like you can kind of
So you're saying you're not totally sold on the medicine. And you're opening up the risk to glaucoma in the
exactly.
future.
So there's a this isn't schizophrenia. I don't have schizophrenia, right? Like this isn't like something where it's like if I don't take the medicine, I'm in big trouble. Like I can live with not taking. Like I'm not on ADHD medication now, which might be obvious to a lot of you, but it's this isn't something I have to take, right? So this is basically how I framed it to her, and she's like, well, look, it's basically you don't have glaucoma, so you should take the medicine, because she's looking at it like this guy has a disorder. Yeah. This is what the book says to take. But I'm like, isn't there some correlation? And like just because I don't have it, I might have it, right?
The key word is yet.
Exactly. Like, isn't it going to increase my chances? Like,
they're not incentivized to think what might happen down the road.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was kind of getting from
risk
this.
management.
So did you come to a resolution to that one?
I'm just not taking it. I'm like ADHD is something I can control. That's my cross to bear. Like I need to figure out how to, I can train my mind to be less distracted. Like we're all distracted.
So like in the case of estrogen blockers and breast cancer, so if you take estrogen blockers, the idea is the receptors are going to no longer receive the estrogen, and therefore you won't have a reoccurrence of breast cancer as likely in the future. Okay, I understand the concept, sure. But when you do that, you're pushing yourself through menopause. And when you push yourself through menopause, you're going to get problems that come with aging sooner in life rather than later. So you're going to sit there and go, well, doctor, I don't know if I should take this medicine because what about heart issues in the future? What about osteoporosis in the future? And the doctor is going to turn to you and be like, well, I'm here to treat your breast cancer, and all I know is this is going to help you with the breast cancer. When it comes time to cross that bridge, go talk to the relevant doctor. And you're stuck because you have to live in that body, right? And now when you try to get into well, how bad is osteoporosis, or how bad will dementia be, or how bad will heart issues be, versus perhaps an early diagnosis of breast cancer of 95 to 99% survivability rates, that matrix, that cost-benefit analysis, that doctor is like, I'm not here to talk about that. You have breast cancer, and I know this pill will help you. End of story. Completely left-brained, myopic thinking, death by expert class.
Death by managerial society.
Well, this is what happens. We've been in podcasts, but this society, as we get more advanced, is becoming more and more complex, and complex requires then niche skills. You get a BA, then you get a master's, then you get a PhD, and everybody on average is getting hyper educated and therefore more and more and more myopic.
No, we just have a reformed priest class. The old hierarchies
fair enough.
It's neo-feudalism again. It's the old thou shalt. This is the we can't teach the poor to read, because then they might interpret the Bible, and there is only one way to read and interpret the Bible, which is how the church does it. How dare
very much the same. Death by expert class.
Exactly.
And they'll talk down to you because they have the knowledge.
Yeah. It is the priesthood. It's the new version of the priesthood.
And how do you conquer that? Critical reasoning skills. I would almost say generalized knowledge overall is superior to hyper-specific knowledge.
Yep.
Right? What made someone like Pierre Trudeau back in the day in Canada, because he actually was a lawyer and traveled the world and could see things from a larger perspective, if you want to look at it that way. What made Steve Jobs? Was it because he was the best engineer in Silicon Valley? Absolutely not. But he did LSD, he tripped out, he went to India, he lived a full life. He could see the big picture that the myopic engineers in California couldn't, right?
Well, they're MBAs. Again, it's the priest class.
Exactly.
It's almost always a priest class that is the problem.
What made George Washington and the Founding Fathers create the Constitution? Some hyper-specific knowledge? No. They said we have an infancy of a civilization, and we're trying to go 250 to 300 years in the future. On average, what's the right way to get there? And now, both as a civilization, which then permeates into all these different things we're talking about, like the medical response, is death by expert class. We're killing ourselves. Mm-hmm. And when I ask that type of question, there's simply I'm talking into the void. The doctor has no idea how to respond to that.
They're not used to being questioned, just like the priest in the church is not used to being questioned.
Bob, you have, do you want to tell, I think obviously you told the one story of the person you helped, and there's another one. Did you want to get into that?
Sure, yeah. So, we were talking about death by priest class. So this person took the COVID shots, and then ended up with a very bad skin issue. So it was very sort of prolific, sort of scar tissue buildup and other terrible things that happened to the face. Now, it was a girl, it was an ex-girlfriend.
A lot of
And
ex-girlfriends.
I was just gonna say,
a lot of ex-girlfriends. Yes. Well, you know what you do. A nerd who lifts and runs like a greyhound, ends up getting around. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but there you go.
Yeah.
So this was a girl. She worked in the hospital system, which is kind of a terrible kind of, not a funny joke, but it's
the unhealthiest people work in healthcare systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so she worked in the hospital system, and they were required, even though she wasn't in a direct sort of, let's say, patient-facing facility. She worked in the labs, and not even in a cancer lab, which is crazy because of how the story goes on. And she was required to take the vaccine, and she had terrible side effects. So first one gave her side effects. The second one absolutely destroyed her skin, destroyed her body. And they told her she had atopic dermatitis. Now, atopic dermatitis is just an umbrella term. It just means that they don't know why your skin's pissed off, but it's pissed off. And, she came back, we'd spent about a couple of years apart. She came back and, actually, we'd spent 5 years together before that. So I didn't actually see what was going on with her because, you spend long enough with a woman, you get wife goggles, right? It's a terrible trick of nature. Mother Nature is not without her jokes that she performs on men. That happens to be one of them. You're around a woman long enough, you stop seeing things that are going wrong with her. And so I had them for her. And when she came back, I didn't see how bad her skin was, and so she showed me what was going on. And it was actually quite horrific what had happened to her. So she had breakouts. It wasn't to describe it as a breakout is actually a terrible disservice to how bad it was. She was getting basically scaliness of skin. So the skin had lost its ability to maintain hydration. Skin was drying out. It was getting infected and all this kind of stuff. And in typical brilliant fashion, the doctor said, corticosteroids. We give you prednisone. And it wasn't really helping. It was trying to cover up the problem and it was failing. Actually, at one point, it had gotten so bad she had to ice her skin because it felt like it was on fire. So I said, okay, it's like any other broken piece of machinery. You fix it by fixing one problem at a time. And before that, I was at a company, and the board had come to me and gone, we have these problems. You have to fix them, or the company goes away. And, the first thing I did when they came to me and asked me to do this is you write down the problem and then you write down a set of rules. Because the most important thing in problem solving is two things, decomposition and rules. Decomposition is basically taking apart the problem and looking at the individual components of the issue. And then the rules are basically what are the things that we are willing to do, able to do. Willing and able is, two completely different things because willing is, and well, they're mostly the same thing, actually. It's a budgetary constraint, budget and time, right? Money, time, those are the two most important things. So when it comes to fixing problems of the body is a machine just like anything else. So the question is, why is this happening? And what is the way to go about fixing it? And my rule was you do externally what you can do externally, then you do orally, and then you start getting more and more invasive. And orally, the body has a set of levers, just like anything else, like the thing I told you about earlier. It's an allergic reaction. What's the way to take away an allergic reaction? Well, the body, you overwhelm the receptors, and it simply stops seeing it. Just like, when you're talking about, let's say, giving a SERM, which is a estrogen blocker, for specific conditions, that's what they're doing. They're overwhelming the receptors, right? So that's in that case,
clogging the system.
Yeah, they're clogging the system, and the body goes, I don't know what the fuck to do, and it stops. And then you keep going more and more. And so when you're talking about the immune system, there's more levers, and we can get into that. But what did they do with her? So when the stuff started happening with her, they went off and they did a bunch of blood tests. One of her blood tests on a panel for a disease called dermatomyositis came back positive. Just one. And they told her that she had dermatomyositis. But she didn't have dermatomyositis because there was only one test and it's a whole panel. And realistically, and this is what the literature says, all of them have to come back. Then they sent her for she had some masses on her ovaries. So they sent her for a biopsy. And they did a path report on it. And they said, well, you have a immature, was it teratoma, I think? So basically they told her she had cancer. Now, during this whole cycle, they said, well, you have to get your ovary removed.
So sorry to interject. So there was so she had these dermatological problems.
Yes.
She was getting all these tests, and then she was like, oh, I've also got a mass on...
Well, they're telling her that she has dermatomyositis, and the dermatomyositis is because she has basically ovarian cancer. Like she has a mass on her ovary, and so they're calling for removal. And then in all of that, and this is, this people will use to speak against, non-Western medicine. She went to a naturopath. Then naturopath gave her Iscador. Iscador is a derivative of pine needles, and pine needles is used for treating solid tumors. But when they did the biopsy, it wasn't a solid tumor. It was a cyst. There was a cyst, and there was things. And again, I don't remember the 100% of it. Again, it's more than 2 years ago now. And well, long story short, they go off. They cut out the ovary. And it doesn't fix anything. So when she's come back to me...
But it was confirmed cancer?
It wasn't.
Okay.
And so we'll get into that in a second. Yeah. So she comes back to me and she says, she goes, all these things happened to her. I said, and I said to her, I love the woman. I would have married her if things hadn't gone sour between us. And I said, I can accept it happening to anyone on the planet except her. So I said, I'm going to fix this because that's what I do. I fix problems. And so I said, the first thing I bet her was, it's not dermatomyositis. I said, because the symptoms don't match. And I said, without looking at the path report, I bet you they didn't find cancer. She goes, how do you know? I said, because. I said, what you're telling me and that what one test tells me is that it couldn't have been. And so what they did was when she started getting the symptoms and she's getting skin problems, they give her a corticosteroid. The number one thing that happens with corticosteroids, especially, look, your face is fucked up. You're a girl. You're used to being pretty. You're no longer pretty. What do? You eat. Mm-hmm. What happens when you take prednisone or any corticosteroid? When you're eating, you gain weight at a ridiculous rate. She put on 100 pounds. Mm-hmm. You know what that causes? It causes fat buildup on every organ in your body. You gain 100 pounds, I don't care, man, woman.
Visceral fat?
Yeah, everywhere, okay? And that's what it was.
That was the
She had polyps. So they misread polyps. And in that...
They wouldn't have been precancerous, maybe?
Polyps.
Okay.
Zero. I think somewhere I still have the copy of the original path report that she showed me that I could read. And it says very clearly, there was zero evidence of any cancerous or precancerous mass.
But they still chose to take out the ovary.
They said on the first path report, and here's the thing, when they do, the slides are read. One person is supposed to read them. Somebody else is supposed to review and sign off. In her case, it was the same person. Okay?
It's all on one person's shoulders.
All on one person's shoulders.
That's why you need 2 keys to arm the missile.
Then now here's the insane part. Dermatomyositis as a disease is very rare in occurrence. And they wanted to cut out her other ovary because erroneously cutting out one ovary wasn't enough for them. they had to destroy the entirety.
Why
of
did
her
they want to cut out the other ovary?
Because the idea was, well, you know, that is a referred condition being caused by the ovarian issue. I said it's not. I said we're going to prove. I said you give me a couple of months. I'm going to prove that this is not dermatomyositis, that this is a side effect of the vaccine, and we're going to fix it. And so the first thing that I said was, we're going to cut out any external substances that you put on your skin to cover up. For the next little bit, you feel ugly, sucks, I'm sorry, I hate that for you, but my intention is to fix the problem, not cover it up. Any makeup you put on your skin, anything else, gotta go. And we're gonna take it down to the least amount of chemicals, because you don't know, because I also said to her, I said, how do you know if it's atopic dermatitis versus contact dermatitis? And she says to me, how could you have guessed contact dermatitis? Because she had contact dermatitis to specific chemicals. I said, okay, but how do you know that you found every chemical you have contact dermatitis to? I said, so she liked having really beautiful nails. I said, we're gonna get rid of those. Because I asked her, do you scratch your skin? She says, yes. Okay, nails gotta go. You shorten them, keep them normal length. And the thing that happens, and there's this excellent paper on PubMed, is this omnibus paper about skin and all this other stuff. And I read through it, and it's a beautiful paper. But one of the most important things that it says is, every time you scratch your skin, whatever is on your skin, whatever's on your nail or under your nail gets on your skin. Let's say you have an issue where your skin doesn't heal for whatever reason. What happens? It's going to embed little bits, tiny.
Inflammation, infection.
Yeah. So we got rid of her nails and get her to use hydrogen peroxide to clean the skin. So it cleans the skin. And then another thing, there's a black tube of polysporin, and it has one thing that is beautiful. It has 2 topical antibiotics. Topical antibiotics are great because topical antibiotics, like, again, I said rules, right? Topically, not orally, unless you have to go orally, and then you go lower and lower in the chain of chemistry in your body. Topical antibiotics, they don't have any expressed effects on your internals. They're metabolized and then excreted, but, you know, they're not systemic. They don't have side effects.
Safer for now,
Yeah. But it has one more thing. It's lidocaine. Why lidocaine? Because it's a numbing agent. Do you know why you scratch? Because your skin receptors can feel.
Yeah.
If you numb them topically,
You won't do it anymore.
You won't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Which means you'll start healing because you're not
Aggravating?
re-aggravating.
So you got the chemicals down. She's not scratching herself. What happens?
Her skin starts improving
Okay.
almost immediately. Okay? There's no more.
You're doing very simple things here.
Very simple things. Nothing complex. Okay?
But again, going back to like taking vitamin D or going for a 30-minute walk every day, these are just basically lifestyle changes that the medical community is not interested in.
Nope.
Well, to be fair, if you're going into a doctor, I see what you're saying. Like, it's the simple things, but the doctor's job isn't basic health, right?
They're
like
a
the
blunt instrument. They're going to go in quickly and hit the most. They're like, you know what they used to say during World War II, when the Germans bombed, the British would duck. When the British bombed, the Germans would duck. But when the Americans bombed, everybody ducked. And that's kind of like the medical healthcare system. Like, we're going to nuke it. Sort of thing, right? As opposed to doing a nuanced response like Bob.
Well, because I guess the thinking is, if you're going to see a doctor, you've already, like, I think there's an underlying assumption that you're living a healthy lifestyle otherwise. Like, you're getting your vitamins, you're doing this. So if you go in and you're presenting with certain symptoms, it's not going to be like, well, are you not scratching your face? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to.
But it's obviously necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Like, what percentage of American kids right now are pre-diabetic? Is it something like 33% or so?
Well, I think they raised so I don't know if I'm correct on this, but I'm quite certain, unless it's one of those things like the fruit of the loom thing or Barrington Bear, you know, where people misremember or it really is.
The Mandela effect.
Yeah, the Mandela effect, right? So I remember that the A1C ceiling for diabetes was 6. It's 7 now.
Oh.
I'm quite certain of this.
Yeah. Mine is 6. When I go to my doctor, the cutoff is still 6.
because I remember they changed, they would
Because
say
they're trying to put the ceiling higher to
ceiling,
see it's not so bad.
so it's underreported.
Yeah.
And I explained that to someone once, and I said, well, think about how much you're being stolen from if this is in fact, if I'm remembering this correctly. Because at 5.5, once upon a time, at 5.5, your doctor would start screaming. Mm-hmm. Now at 6, they're like, yeah, maybe the bread, you should put it away,
I have a question for both of you. Yeah. Do you think, this is just overall, things like diabetes, things like high blood pressure, like all of these metrics, is it all a spectrum, or does something magical happen at a certain point where, for example, if your blood sugar is 7, are you then like you just have diabetes, you'll always have diabetes, or can you reverse diabetes?
Type 2, you can reverse.
Yeah, type 2 is reversible, yeah.
Okay, so are a lot of these things, because, I remember just going to the doctors, like, you would always hear like, oh, diabetes, once you have it kind of thing. Like, and it's,
because
I think
when we were younger,
there
there wasn't so much type 2. So the one you probably heard anecdotally or colloquially was just type 1 diabetes.
Well, it's not even that. It's so the reason why they say type 2 is not reversible is because it depends on the state of your pancreas. So there are 2 functional tests that you always do when you look at diabetes. They don't generally do them, but you should be doing them. It's amylase and lipase. Your amylase and lipase levels are a key indicator of the health of your pancreas, because your pancreas are what produces insulin. Diabetes is basically the inability to produce enough insulin and to process glucose properly enough in your body. The problem is, if you're awash in glucose all the time, your pancreas will eventually blow out, just like anything else in your body, just like your liver. If you keep putting alcohol through your system, incidentally, glycine is actually really great at defanging alcohol. So if you really want to drink like a fish, glycine will actually interfere with the metabolism of alcohol.
So you're just overworking organs. Is that it?
Of course.
But I guess what I'm asking is, for example, is it reversible? If your pancreas isn't producing insulin anymore, is it possible to?
Then you're screwed, right? But again,
so
nothing in your body is dead unless you've like the organ removed and like I don't think that there is any position. Again, I'm not 100%. Like I said, I'm not licensed in anything, and I don't think that there's a point where outside of removal or just atrophy or destruction, right? Mm-hmm. Something has stopped working in you.
So do you think because we're getting into, and I don't want to stray too far away, and I know we have to bring it home, but like, I wonder, for example, going forward, we have pancreases, that are blown out or whatever, or any other organ. Do you think with regenerative medicine being what it is now and how it's progressing pretty quickly, that's, for example, you can have stimulants or something put into the pancreas so it does start reproducing insulin. So it's like you get your body and your diet. So for example, if you have like full-blown diabetes, you're getting all the bad things that come with that. Do you expect there to be a point where you can rehabilitate the pancreas? And like, are there any tools to do that now? And if not, do you think that that's something that is coming soon?
Well, epigenetics is a real thing, right? Like express genetics, that's what they say. Your epigenetics is almost as important, even more important than...
You want to explain what that is, though, for...
Epigenetics, basically. So, you have your genetics, which is basically, I think it's your stored configuration, right?
Right.
And then epigenetics is like your running configuration. I think it's an easy way to think about it. It's like your running state. And, everything in your life is a function of your running state, no matter what your stored configuration is. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying, you come from a family of people who are, 5'8", you're going to be 6'4". It's not. It may happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people in a lot of countries are the sizes they are because of protein intake and things like that. So there is say for instance a 25% increase in height. I think something like that in East Asians, for example. In meat-eating countries, is because, this is protein, and they come from vegetarian countries where it's primarily starch and vegetables, whereas in meat-eating countries they have the protein. But it's like, if you live let's say your family has a predisposition for diabetes. Predisposition does not mean you're going to have it. It's a set of your choices. You may have all the markers, mm-hmm. but they don't have to express. The expression is a function of and I'm only talking about those kinds of things. I'm not talking about things like male pattern baldness and things like that. Certain things are just written in stone.
There's things like the breast cancer gene, like Angelina Jolie has. That particular gene translates into breast cancer. I'll use the word only. She won't use the word only, obviously, because she had a double mastectomy. Translates into breast cancer 50% of the time.
Right.
So there's no single gene that says you have this gene 100% time you're getting cancer. At best, it's 50%. So it's the activation of that gene through lifestyle.
Right.
I guess
that's what epigenetics is.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
what you choose to put into your body has effects, right?
I guess my question is more like, I'm thinking of somebody listening to this being like, well, this advice would have been great like 30 years ago, but
No,
now
it's
my
never
body
too late
is...
to start. No, it's never too late to start. It's never too late. Look, my sugar was obscene at certain points. My cholesterol at this point, like my most recent sugar numbers, my sugar is at 4.1. My cholesterol is beautiful. My doctor asks me, how do you get it? And I said, well, you know what I do? I eat like it doesn't matter what I eat. In the sense, like, I don't care about the taste. I care about the fact that it is fuel.
So you've cut sugar and carbs down, glucose down to zero almost?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Is there sugar in that coffee?
No, there's no.
Well, you said sugar and you kind of pointed to the coffee.
If you look at this cup of coffee, I mean, it looks like it's just, dirt water. So, that's basically.
But you get used to it. Me too. Like there's, you got to have about 2 grams of protein for every kilogram you weigh, sort of thing. And you can get to all these different metrics. You know how much sugar you should basically have? Zero.
Yeah.
There's no point even trying to measure it because it should be zero. Yeah. Like just aim for zero. You can say 30 G's or more, okay, really, but really zero is the best place to
You can do 0 grams of sugar, and you shouldn't have artificial sweeteners either because they have endocrine side effects, right? So you shouldn't have soy. And a lot of people, they'll say, oh, I'm eating healthy. But then what they'll do is they'll go and and there's a... You said something about the food thing, and I think there's you get used to it. I want to caution. So you asked me how did I free myself to come back to that point? I don't think about it like that. It's like get used to it. Get used to what? It's like, oh, my car runs diesel. Oh, you get used to putting diesel in your car. No, it's a diesel car. So
it's a mindset.
For a huge part of our life as human beings. For a huge part of our history as human beings, as a species, we ran meat and whatever berries we could pick. There was no soy. There was no emulsifiers.
Nothing
there
will
was
kill
no
you faster
complex
than health food. Because
but it's not just health food.
It's hyper processed stuff. Yeah.
Even in spices, there are so many spices where you see corn derivatives. All the corn is GMO. Okay, all the corn is optimized for output and sugar. It's and there are so many side effects to that. And you know what I put when I cook my meat? I put salt, maybe some pepper, maybe some rosemary.
Oh, of course.
And I
can put sauce on it.
Do some butter. There's nothing else on there. And people say, "Oh, but how do you live like that?" Because I know that when I'm, and then these same people look at those people that are 70, 80 years old, deadlifting. There's a man on YouTube, deadlifts he benches 400 pounds at 64, raw. No wraps, no nothing, all this kinds of stuff. So, but that only comes from that kind of thing. My car runs diesel. When did you ever feel the need to put, gas in it? It's not about getting used to it. That's what the machine runs. And it goes back to this whole thing. We look at our lives as these points between, it's a cheat day, it's a cheat week, or it's just my birthday, or it's a Sunday, or this. It's all these things, as opposed to just, this is what life is. You know what I mean?
Well, it's also different. I mean, just in some ways, it's different for everyone. Like, I mean, when I used to run big distances, it would be, that bowl of pasta the night before was the thing that gave me fuel. Like, I could feel that it was giving me fuel. There wasn't a mental thing. It was like, I could feel the extra. Like,
but that's because you switched to glucose metabolism. There's no reason to switch to glucose metabolism. You can switch to fat. Fat is, so if you want to take that analogy that I was making, fat metabolism is diesel, glucose metabolism is gas. It's because glucose, it spikes and then it runs out. With fat, it's harder to get started and it's harder to maintain running just fat metabolism. Once you get used to it, or once you just, that's how you live, that's how you live. But there's a reason why our ancestors were running down antelope,
Well, that's glucose sensitivity, right? So he can switch from glucose to ketones.
Yeah, he can.
So that's instead of just being high on taking your energy from glucose, if you're glucose insensitive, then your body's going to want to run on glucose all the time, right?
But if you're glucose insensitive, then you have a harder time handling the glucose in general. That's what makes your A1C higher, your sugar levels higher.
Okay, yes. But if you have glucose sensitivity, so would it be not metabolic sensitivity? I think it's glucose sensitivity. When you have glucose sensitivity and you don't have glucose in your body, you're sensitive enough to switch over to ketones. Yeah. So you get an alternate food source. So you wouldn't need that pasta.
You wouldn't need as much either, and you couldn't tolerate it because you realize how starchy starches are. I'll be very honest. It's like sugar. People get so deadened to how much sugar. Milk is sweet. 2% milk is sweet. Vast majority of people don't realize. When you ask me, hey, is your coffee? My coffee's sweet. You know why my coffee's sweet?
You have milk in it, yeah.
Because I have milk in it. That's it.
And do you know how you prevent the spike of glucose when you have 2% milk versus whole milk? They have the same amount of sugar.
Yep.
But if you measure on a continuous glucometer, your spike, you'll get less of a spike on whole milk.
Yep.
Because the fat in the milk counteracts the sugar.
Yeah.
So everything we're told, take 1%, it's healthier. Actually, it's not.
Yeah. The same. Yeah.
You want the fat in there.
Even lactose free.
Yeah.
Lactose free. Eventually, if you look at the sugar content, go look at the numbers. Don't take my word for it. Just go look for the numbers. And I think the worst thing that I despise this because it's such a sales tactic. I remember I was in a different country some time ago, and I went to a juice bar, and I was trying to get like the cleanest thing because I didn't want any sugar, and he goes, oh, this is just sweetened by dates.
Yeah.
I go. He goes, it's natural,
yeah.
and I said, do you realize how much sugar?
Sugar is sugar.
Yes. Yeah. How much sugar there is in each date? He goes, no. I said, there's 23 grams of sugar in a single date. It doesn't matter. Yes. And you know what? Actually, that's one of the ways I found out. I found that out the hard way. Because at one point, I was like, you know what? I want to just have the minimum amount. And I would have 2 or 3 dates every night as a treat. Mm-hmm. And that's why I got away from that thought process of like treats. So, I have this thing. I eat my food, and then I will have a cup of milk. Like a small cup of milk, and that's it. That's all I need. And once you've, I hate to use that word, but once you made that like this is all I need, you don't have that constant like
the glucose molecule, whether it's in white processed sugar or raw organic honey, is still the glucose molecule, and the body's going to interpret the molecule. Mm-hmm. The only thing you get when you have fruit, let's say, and you're still getting glucose, is you're getting some fiber with it. And that can help mitigate some of the spike.
Well, you're getting a lot more than fiber with fruit. Like I eat a lot of berries, and I know it's because there's a lot of good vitamins in there.
Yeah, and you'll get more antioxidants out of a blueberry than you would out of honey. And I love honey, but I'm really off it now. And really, if you want, you should be eating then like blackberries or raspberries because they're the lowest in sugar. So you're going to get the antioxidants without the sugar spike.
Actually, if I can jump in, so we were talking about that skin thing.
Yeah, we never finished also with your ex-girlfriend, the last ex-girlfriend, not the...
No, the
Sorry,
other.
to bring it back to that, because we have had a nice little diversion here, but what was the final... what happened?
So I actually managed to fix the whole problem. So the skin started improving, but there were still issues. So one of the things I read, so they did a skin biopsy, and what they found was there was scaling happening. There's a proper term for it. Keratinization, I think, maybe. I want to call it that, but maybe I'm misremembering, but that's okay. And I read up about it, and I said, wait, I know one chemical that is useful for this. So scaling is basically and if I'm remembering keratinization, there's one chemical, and it's over-the-counter. Nizoral, ketoconazole, or ketoconazole. It's a shampoo.
Yeah, I know what Izerol is.
Yeah.
I've taken it.
So you know what you do? So she had all the scaliness. I said, okay, so let's read through the path report and see what's scaling. What do we need to do to get rid of that? Well, it's a similar condition according to the pages is what happens on your scalp when you get scaliness of your scalp. That's what causes dandruff. Well, okay.
Let's just shampoo the forehead.
You shampoo the forehead. And you start small because, the skin's already suffering. So you only want to take one small section. So you take about a dime or dollar size section. And then you basically just apply it there. You leave it 10 to 12 minutes and you wash it. She comes back. A couple days later, that spot has cleared up. The scaling is gone. Excellent. So we start doing the whole face because it's everywhere, okay? So, all right, we get rid of that. Now what? There's still redness and inflammation and things like that. But she reported that she had it on other parts of her skin. So she had it on her chest. She had it on her arms some places. I said, okay, well, it's on your skin. It's on disconnected parts of your body. And there's only a couple of ways that can happen. Now, the COVID vaccines, there was a paper I read about line 1 reverse transcription. And it's basically the fucking vaccine ends up in your liver. It reverse transcribes into your liver. And, there are different things about it. And I said, okay.
And does this mean transcribes to the DNA?
Well, there are different papers, but
Okay.
I believe it does. But at least it reverse transcribes into your liver tissue and it ends up in your liver tissue. Okay. So now you start giving her a liver protective compound. And the other thing is, if it's reverse transcribed, you know what else you're probably doing? You're producing spike proteins. Okay. Let's assume you're producing spike proteins. Within the research that was done, lots of other brilliant people had done a lot of research, and they found that N-acetylcysteine, NAC, blocked the ACE2 receptor, which the spike would bind to. So we talked about earlier, you tell the body to fuck off. Easiest way, block the receptors. Okay? Let's figure out how she does with NAC. Now, NAC has, I think, a half-life of 6 hours, roughly, and I studied it. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to start with 1 dose. And we start with 1 dose. And I have the numbers down. I'm happy to provide a spreadsheet for everybody if anyone's interested and anyone has similar issues. So you give NAC. But at the same time, you have to give glycine because NAC without glycine causes a depletion in a neurotransmitter, GSH. Is it glutathione? Yes. And so you give glycine because glycine supplementation helps with preventing that. And also over use of NAC causes a condition called anhedonia, which is basically similar to depression. Things don't taste good, life doesn't taste so great, all that kind of stuff. And so you want to be very careful with it. It's not. And I also found one of the things I did, and this was one of my rules, is any chemical should be one that is metabolically as cheap as possible. What does that mean? It means, it doesn't have significant clearance effects. It, is excreted, easily, either through your sweat or through your renal pathway. It isn't heavy on the liver because if you're already suffering on your liver, then, you shouldn't be putting more stress on the liver. Also with your liver enzymes, for instance, like there's a specific family, the CYP family, I want to say 3A. You want to be careful because there's only so much of this, so much of the enzyme, and you don't want to overload it, things like that. So you have to be very careful about chemistry, right? So all these rules are very important.
Which are hard to do on your own.
They are. Yes. The vast majority of...
You've given a lot of, be careful, don't do this. Be careful, don't do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very challenging.
Yeah, you
right?
have to really know your stuff.
Because you might read something and go, NACs, the NAC is the way
Yeah.
to
No,
go,
no,
man.
that's how most
people
Then
do
if you
this
don't
stuff.
get the other stuff with
You
it.
have to get... So you have to understand a lot of these chemicals, they have half-lives. They have side effects. So I'll give you an excellent example.
So 1 second.
Yeah,
Would you say then the new regulations people are putting in surrounding supplementation, you probably know in Canada they want to start regulating it more.
I think
is
it's
it a good
ridiculous.
thing or a bad thing?
No, I think it's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing because...
Because you've given some caveats because things can go wrong if you take the wrong kind of supplementation.
Right, but that's a caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? The vast majority of people are simply not asked up to the task, okay? Look,
But that's the primary problem, right? And that's why I think this is, I guess previous to COVID, most people trusted in their national health apparatus. Yeah. Like, because it's easy to kind of look at, it's easy to go wrong. It's easy to go to, like, honest to God, like when you guys are when you're talking about that, like you're saying all these terms, and it would be hilarious if somebody could see a thought bubble from my head, because it's just like, this sure sounds complicated.
But it is
I think
complicated,
that's how
but
most
so is-
people think. Like, it's just too much and it's overwhelming. And it's like,
right, but so is but that's like, okay, I'll give you an excellent example.
How is an average person supposed to... So one question. How is an average person supposed to navigate their way through this?
Well, they're probably not. Okay, I'll be very honest.
So then,
there's a lot of
now I
information.
stop you at that point.
Yeah.
So then the medical institution, the apparatus, is going to say, therefore, you have to turn back to the expert class.
yeah.
Because if you give a probably not checkpoint, that means
I'm just being realistic, right? I'm
Right.
just being realistic. But that's the same. I'm just going to say this. But that's like the equivalent of like Microsoft way back in the years and Sun saying we've built the best operating systems. Nobody needs to write another operating system. Linux wouldn't exist. Linus would have never. If the answer was, oh, you can't write an operating system and ever have it be as good as BSD, Unix, or I repeat myself when I say BSD. But Unix, Sun Solaris, VMS, and then Windows. Oh, you never need to write your own OS, and we're going to legislate compilers or compiler access because nobody should try to write their OS. Linux wouldn't exist.
This is an interesting...
The vast majority of modern computing, everyone with an Android phone, if they believe that is correct, what they're saying, that controls and
but your
supplementation
life isn't on the line.
Yeah, and
absolutely is.
But this,
you know how many real-time devices and like cars and everything, all the car OSs are Androids.
Okay.
Almost all car OS
But
is Linux.
they could have also been like Microsoft in some level. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like an and or sort
Would
of
you
thing.
trust Microsoft to be the thing that controls your car?
No, I'm just saying it would get the job done.
Would it?
But
Would it, Jason?
I mean, you're going to say Microsoft to me. I'm going to say,
and here's the other problem, right? So I'm just going to, here's the other problem. So in Canada, for instance, testosterone is a controlled substance, okay? Does that stop the average gym bro from having access to testosterone?
Yeah, I don't even know the world of testosterone or what people take. That's one thing I haven't looked into.
So but I'm just using an example.
Yeah.
Right.
So do they have access to testosterone?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a black market. And all you're doing with egregious controls on certain substances, okay, well-studied,
This is where your
well-tolerated.
right-wing capitalism side kicks
Absolutely.
in. Yeah.
But I'm a complete anarchist. I make right-wing. I am slightly to the right of God.
Of God. How dare you?
I knew it. Those right-wingers were religious.
No, I've actually been called a white supremacist on Twitter, which is hilarious given
Well, we don't
certain
have video,
characteristics
so.
of me.
In a
that's gonna be
really
lost on
weird
everyone.
way, it's almost a compliment because it shows to the extent you've been able to jump over what people would assume are barriers from like religion or culture or where you grew up in the world. Do you know what I mean? You are free. You're just a free human being.
Oh, absolutely.
To the point they're racializing you.
Yes, they're misracializing.
Can I? Okay, so first of all, I want to go back to it's because it's an interesting thing, and I think it might
Education.
steer us forward.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Bringing up the Linux operating system is a community. The whole thing about Linux is very community based, right? It's open source. Like there's a lot of community built around it, and it's an alternative to things like Microsoft.
There's a huge.
Give me a second, please. It's an alternative to things like Microsoft, which are more top down.
Yeah.
You know, the code is hidden. Maybe that's what we need in today's society. Maybe that is the alternative, where it's people like yourself and like yourself, sir, that are coming together and forming some sort of network of trusted competence, where you have people who are confused. It's something like, honestly, like I am not at your level in this with this health stuff. Like I don't understand it. It's too complicated for me. Like it's just not my strength, and it's not something I put a lot of research into. But listening to you both talk, listening to the knowledge and I'm a logical person. I can follow the train of logic. I might not understand the terms, and it makes more sense to me than just going to a doctor and just getting whatever. Like I'd probably do both, but like having that option, having that community-based network available, maybe that's something that people like yourself should consider, like trying to start building.
Oh, absolutely. But see, okay, but I was actually just going to say that the reason why open source works is because it's the idea that we don't hide. There's danger with open source, but the danger is greater with closed source. Yes, basically. Yeah. Many eyes make for shallow bugs, essentially, right? Like the transparency is the ultimate defense against corruption and authoritarianism. Right? So to the point about supplementation potentially having some dangerous side effects, the greater danger is simply not having access and learning from this sort of stuff. So therefore, some side effects be damned. Let's all try to work together, because the net benefit will be so far positive. Yes, that's the direction. If you're saying the greatest good for the greatest numbers, you can achieve more with education than you can do with authority. People will find a way to subvert authority. I come from one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. My source country is one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. It is considered one of the worst places in the world to live. And the only reason it stays that way is because we as a race believe in authoritarianism, at least in our country.
You believe in authoritarianism?
I don't.
Culturally, I see.
It is always a top-down hierarchy. It's killing our species, it's killing our country, it is killing our race, and now it has spread to the rest of the world and is killing the species.
You have to give credit to your people, because despite that system they're living under, they generally, I don't want to say they do well, but they have managed to sort of eke something out. And when they leave such a structure and go elsewhere in the world, they're highly successful.
You know why?
Tell me.
Because
why.
they're like me. They don't believe in authoritarianism.
The cream of the crop is leaving.
Right. Yeah. So basically, they scream over the brain drain. The brain drain is, you cannot tell a mind what to do. Yeah. It will simply say no.
Do you think, though, that system, just going back to your culture for a second, because I see this, my background is partly Greek, same idea. It's sort of one of those people are quite intelligent, robust, come from good families. They have everything going they need to be strong, self-actualized human beings. If you unleash 10 million of those people, though, in Greece's case, it's a very small number, but they're very hard to control. So what is one of the worst bureaucratic states in all of Europe? Greece. Mm-hmm. What does it do? It forces everybody to submit to a system and doesn't allow them to actually grow. Yep. So it's like a mechanism of control, But
it's
when they leave, they become very successful elsewhere because they themselves are strong. It's a system that's been holding them back. Yep. And I think that system is actually on purpose to hold. Maybe there's a hierarchy around the world where like certain countries are going to flourish, certain countries aren't. We know what we need to do to make a country flourish. We need to know what we need to do to make it not flourish. Yep. And they've decided externally that countries like my heritage and your heritage are not in this epoch going to flourish.
I think it's a
and we're seeing that being installed. Sorry to cut you off one more time. Yeah. We're starting to see that installed, going back to COVID and mandates, and elsewhere in the world too. Yep. They've almost used those as like the canary in the coal mine sort of thing. If we can control people in your country and my country who are self-actualized, hardworking, have a strong culture, everything you need to be, if they can control those people, the rest of the world will be easy.
Yep. But innovation dies in those places, right? So the thing is, and that's why I'm saying, one of the greatest things that exists in my country is the black market. I remember when I was much younger and I had let's say a bureaucratic issue to solve organizationally. And the answer was simple. You walk in with a clock bag full of cash.
Greece too.
And the problem goes away. And the rules don't exist. And that's coming here. And, it already exists here. And I'll be very honest. Listen, the kinds of people that the rules are supposed to stop are not stopped by it. I will just make the goddamn supplement. I will start my own lab and I will make it from scratch. chemistry isn't the hardest of subjects, right?
Well,
So-
realistically, though, there's not a lot of people who are going to do that.
Of course not, but they will be the people that make the most amount of money.
Alternative.
What happened during Prohibition? Did Prohibition stop alcohol? It did not. It created one of the greatest black markets. It created the greatest crime problem that the U.S. has ever seen.
So what was the final? What ended up happening with this girl?
Well, actually, she got better. So the thing was,
So she had the
gave her NAC and glycine, and the skin really started clearing up. But then she had symptoms of what is colloquially called CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's interesting because she wasn't the only person I saw that had taken the vaccines and had side effects. She had a friend that had breathing symptoms. She didn't have skin symptoms, but she had breathing symptoms. And then what she got was rhinosinusitis with polyps. And it's
say that 3 times fast.
Chronic rhinosinusitis with polyps. I'm sorry. I'm in there.
Look at the chronic rhinosinusitis with polyps, please.
But so what I found is that there was this issue where it almost seemed like people who had taken the vaccine, and I've only seen a very small n size. I'm talking n equals 4, right? It's nothing,
Mm-hmm.
A study outside of the social sciences would get kicked out by any decent journal. But what I saw was there was an issue with non-essential amino acids like taurine, glycine, because she really picked up once I started giving her the glycine, which, I mean, it's a foil to the NAC itself, but it's also, I think, there was an issue where the vaccine seems to, and I don't have access to enough data, and I don't have access to enough people to do that kind of, I would have loved to, and I think that is a very interesting, I think there's a PhD in there somewhere for someone, okay? Not for me. I don't really give a shit. But I mean, I do. If I had the access to the resources and the people and stuff like that, I would do it for free. I don't even want the PhD. I just want the people to get better. And I think that's one of the things I said to her. I said, from one human being to another, because I haven't forgotten the definition of the word. But yeah, so there's an issue with non-essential amino acids, which is basically, the taurine, the glycine, creatine. There's a whole list. And I noticed that she had this issue with CFS-like symptoms. So started giving her taurine, and she actually perked up. And eventually I found a very interesting thing. Giving her a loading dose of creatine and then putting her on a maintenance dose. So loading dose is 0.03 times kilogram of body weight, times per kilogram of body weight. And then getting down to like 7 grams every day is roughly, that actually made her significantly better. So at that point, she was on NAC, she was on glycine, she was on taurine, and she was on creatine. And so it's basically just off-the-counter substances.
Well, I will say it's impressive that you were able to solve that puzzle.
Oh, it's a very fun puzzle.
Like it seems like a fun puzzle to solve, and that's why House was so popular, I guess, as a TV show. But it really is like it must have felt like almost ecstatic, figuring that out and then applying it and seeing it be successful.
Yeah, and actually a lot of it was just figuring out what her immunoglobulin levels were. And in her case, it was her IgG that was significantly high. The problem with IgG being very high, especially in a woman, is that she was in her 30s, and the issue with IgG is if you have a baby or you get pregnant, your immunoglobulins start crossing the placenta at week 12, I think. Yeah, week 12, I think. And that's how the baby's immune system gets bootstrapped, and it has profound immune side effects.
Yeah.
So the child, and there's a paper now, or there's been a paper for at least 2 years that says that the immune response conferred by the COVID vaccine is inherited by the children. So it's not just the fact that any immune dysfunction in the mother is inherited by the baby. It's also that IgG is one of the classes of immunoglobulins that crosses the placenta, and there's the side the side note that, and a lot of people don't realize this, pregnancy is a profoundly immune-mediated response. The fetus is an allograft on the body, and it changes the T cell response in the female body as soon as pregnancy starts. It switches from Th1 to Th2, I think, if I remember correctly. There's a lot of very complicated immune stuff that happens. And part of what I was doing when this was all going on was, reading through papers about SLE and RA, which is lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, because while they, it's an immune issue. So she had an IgG issue. It's, basically, they are the best documented autoimmune issues. And basically what the vaccine is causing is something that seems very similar to an autoimmune, right? Because you have the same kind of weird side effects. You have, systemic kind of allergic reactions. You have issues with energy processing. You have things like, why would a vaccine cause something that's affecting your ability to synthesize or process non-essential amino acids?
Do you think they were aware of this?
I don't think they tested it enough.
So
because
you wouldn't go nefarious on this. You think it was just moving too quickly? The speed of science?
Don't ascribe to
malice
what
can
can be
what's
explained
it,
by
is that Hanlon's
incompetence.
razor, is it?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. It's probably that, move fast and break things, right? It'll be fine.
It is interesting that China didn't mostly use the mRNA technology at all.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And where did the purportedly the virus start?
Sinovacs, yeah.
China. So it starts there, spreads to the world, and the applied remedy is not the one that goes global, isn't the one they actually used in the place where it started from.
I think there were.
It's a little
I think greed is a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are looking at it as a conspiracy. I think it was a conspiracy, but it was a conspiracy for people to become billionaires. It wasn't a conspiracy to poison the population. I think the thing that I think Omicron saved us because there was this whole thing. I don't know if you're familiar with Merix in chickens.
No.
So Merix is a virus in chickens that just kills your freaking chickens. And they came up with a leaky vaccine. And the COVID vaccine was leaky because what was happening was you had breakthrough infections. And it was almost as if you got the vaccine, you got worse with your infection was worse.
You have what they call like original antigenic sin.
Yeah.
Like immune imprinting.
Yeah.
And then with each variant, you are making you're making suboptimal antibodies.
Yes.
And you're going to get sicker.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you might not actually die, but you're going to get sicker.
Exactly.
So it makes the whole world, in a sense, more sick. But then you'd be like, look, the mortality rates are still better with it than without. And you get some weird little data circle like that. Yeah.
Right.
And if you don't have a control group, because they tried to force it on everybody, who's to say?
Yeah. Well,
And
people
each
like
time
me
it
are the
breaks
control.
through, they just blame the variant as opposed to it being a leaky vaccine.
Right. And people like me are the control because I never took it. And I actually fought my day job on that. And I basically said, you have two choices. I can either continue to work here and not take it, or I can leave and not take it. Your choice.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing. Because they knew from like January 2021 in Israel that there was already breakthrough cases.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're going to do it for the total population and force it because it's going to, once we take the job, that's how we get back to normal, was a complete fabrication.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
that gets into the nefarious parts. It's simply about making money, or was there more to it? That will
I think it was just, I can't imagine a part of the species that is so profoundly evil. But I guess, who was that guy? Kevorkian and Mengele and the Team 17 in Japan, or Team 117 during World War II in Japan that they experimented on humans. So there are some fucked up people on this planet, right? And I think there are people that are willing to experiment on humans. I think there are people that are willing to experiment on large parts of the population. If you remember the
MK
Tuskegee,
Ultra and everything like that.
Yeah,
right?
the
Like,
common good. They're going to be like, well, for the common good, we know if the
well,
world
what
is
common good comes out of?
Well, they're going to say every country on earth has become basically insolvent, and the banksters are going to now try to collect their loans, which is going to create economic turmoil. In order to prevent such economic turmoil and have riots like you'd have in India or in Greece when Greece went bankrupt, canary in the coal mine 10 years ago, or Argentina too, we're going to have a more stronger digital network around us via vaccine passports and whatever else you want to load into that.
CBDCs.
And therefore, you're going to have a much CBDCs. You're going to have a much more easier transition into the future. Yeah. So was there an actual virus? Sure. But was there a vaccine? Perhaps. But did they want to then maximize that for greater political means? I think absolutely.
Politicians will never let any disaster go unused. She had a secondary problem that she got after that at the same time. She got an allergic reaction to the sun. It's called solar-mediated urticaria, which is basically you get hives. You get an allergic response to the sun itself.
Anything inflammatory was bothering her.
Yeah. And so what I figured out there was, and what they say is, what the medical journal says is, this is unfixable. It can only be managed. I said, okay, well, how do you fix an allergic reaction? Well, you make it so the body can tolerate the allergen long enough that it gets used to it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I started giving her berberine and green tea, because berberine and green tea, if you're awash in FcεRI inhibitors all the time, you basically just cannot have an allergic reaction. So the point is, we were going and running about 6K every day. I got her on a good freaking diet. Yeah. Every day we'd go for a run about 6K.
So you were reliving your childhood through her.
No, I wasn't. Absolutely.
A little bit, running outside, pushing you through it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Good point.
But the point was to get her to a point where her skin got used to the sun again. Mm-hmm. When you're used to coating your skin in, and I don't know what came first, it wasn't, is it that the vaccine caused the issue? I think it did, but I think that the corticosteroid destroyed, you're applying corticosteroids and taking oral corticosteroids all the time, you're going to cause some damage to your skin, to the external layer of your skin. Skin's not fragile, but it isn't titanium either. So got her used to going out in the sun again, because at one point she basically couldn't go out without a hat covering her. Otherwise she would burn. And, she was...
Like Michael Jackson or something, right? India, something like that.
And she was, from a part of the world where the sun is just part of your day, It's 40 degrees Celsius outside all the time. So that's crazy. But doing that and getting her through that, eventually the allergy went away, the sun allergy went away.
Good to you. You changed somebody's life. Can I extrapolate out I don't want to go too far into this, but I think we've kind of touched on something here. Do you feel like in the current political atmosphere around the world that we have two diametrically opposed forces? And they're really what we're talking about. One is more centralization of control globally over everything. Mm-hmm. And the other one is like the self-actualization of the human being. Mm-hmm. And that the political election coming up in November here in 2024 in the States is really about those two forces colliding.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you feel that?
Absolutely.
I know that for a fact. Test his knowledge, because I feel like, again, if we extrapolate a little further out, this is actually the two forces we're fighting against.
Yeah, of course.
We can talk about alcohol or supplements and Linux and Windows, but really, if you go further out, it's empowering the individual in a democratic and very decentralized way, or putting everything back in the box.
Actually, you know what? I'll take it further back. There's a what I consider one of the greatest women to have ever existed, Ayn Rand. I would happily buy her flowers and a steak. And not make a move, because goddamn brilliant woman. She wrote a book a long time ago.
She's a future ex-girlfriend for you.
Oh, fuck, I wish. I wish. I'd buy her steak and not try to make a move, like I said.
She wasn't the most attractive.
I don't care.
Exotic. She was exotic.
She was. Brilliant.
Yeah, she was brilliant.
And, there's this idea, and I know a lot of people make it about a lot of things, and that book is about simple thing. It's about slavery and freedom.
Oh, which one are you talking about? Atlas Shrugged?
Atlas Shrugged, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's, there's this whole thing about this guy. He's talking about I can't remember what the character's name is, and he builds planes in the real world, and then he fucks off. He leaves society, and he builds planes, and he says, "Well, I left. They took over my factory. The planes they built killed a bunch of people. I make bacon now. I don't need them to make my bacon, but without me, they can't make the planes. I can still make planes, and I can grow my bacon, but without me, they can't make the planes.
No, explain that to me. I don't understand.
So this guy,
Yeah.
he's a manufacturer of planes,
Yeah.
builder of planes.
Yeah.
And so he leaves. So they have that Directive 10-289, and as part of 10-289, what they say is, well, if you leave, your shit gets nationalized,
Okay.
government takes over and runs it. And then his cousins or some minor governmental character, a Cuffy Mags, like the jackasses we have in Parliament everywhere now. They nationalize it. They decide, it's like 20th century motor, right? The idea of 20th century motor is it's built originally by a mechanic, a garage mechanic, and it's brilliance, ability, willingness, to bleed. And he, they take over 20th century motor, and they think that it's the mark that sits on those motors that makes them what they are, as opposed to the merit behind the mark.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's the same thing. They think that reopening the factories of the airplane manufacturer will give them that ability.
Yeah.
The tools condition the mind, and give them. It's almost like the whole priest thing that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Because you're in the building, you have that ability, and you see that in a lot of places. This whole idea that if you just give people the position, they will eventually become worthy of the position, and we keep trying that. And so it's so what he says is, by leaving and going to Galt's Gulch, what they've proved is the symbol thing is that the ability is a function of the person, of the mind, and that's what it is.
Yep.
So that's what I think the civilizational clash is now. It's not just in America, it's everywhere. It's the people who can and do, the producers versus consumers.
But those ones they want to suppress.
Yes, of course, because
Like, as we're doing our own research here to be healthy,
Yeah.
Everything we bump into in the medical system is to try to suppress us.
Yeah.
To diminish us, to berate us,
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, so I guess the message of the day is, do your own research, or get a little more educated with some of this stuff. I know I'm going to, and I don't know. It's just the times we live in. We have access to data. We are living in a more authoritarian age. It definitely is good practice to arm yourself with education and developing a smart mindset where you can rely on a network of sources and your own intellect and putting things together as best you can. So, Bob, I want to thank you for being here today. It was extremely technical conversation, at least for me.
Sorry.
I think Dimitri, you probably got more out of it.
It's extreme. But I just wanted to ask Bob, any last advice for humanity on these sorts of things? What is the one thing you think we should, what do you want to impart here, leave here, summarize it up like you're an AI version of everything you know?
Read and learn, and don't take what you are told as the gospel truth. You read a paper, even if you read a PubMed paper, look at look if there's any editor's notes, there are any withdrawals, there are redactions, anything like that. Look at who's quoting the paper. Look at what papers are quoted. Look at the numbers. Look at the confidence values. Understand what those mean. I know nobody wants to study statistics, but understand what those means. Don't just look at the summary. Understand that PubMed papers, if they don't have the free full text, that there is a service called Deep Dive. Deep Dive is a company that makes it available for a set amount, access to most papers, if not all. There are lots. We have the equivalent of all of human knowledge available to us at our fingertips on devices 100% of the time. I still remember, being old enough, where you had to go to the library, find the textbook,
or go through the encyclopedias.
And still wouldn't have access to all the papers. I personally have, in my childhood, would have benefited from having access to this information because there's certain aspects of my health that would have been much better than they are today.
It would be interesting looking at like what would be good. You know, you mentioned statistics. Like, what are the actual courses that people could use in this new age, right? Like, what are the best courses people could be taking in university? Is it things like statistics? Is it like,
hard sciences, and applied sciences are worth more than any of these. When I was young, I wanted to go and teach physics, and as a young man, I actually got into MIT. Couldn't afford to go, but I wanted to teach physics. But there's one of the reasons I'm not a theoretical physicist today, and I'm not, is because there's no money in it. Theory means nothing. Application is everything. And it applies to your personal life as well. I can say fancy stuff, and you can hear it, and you can feel good, and you can think, oh, well, if that guy can do it, I can do it too. But the thing is, you have to start, right? If I hadn't gone off and said, well, let's read the pathology report and figure out what can, fix this. At one point, for instance, for her dry skin, I used eye drops, hyaluronic acid eye drops. And the reason why I did that is because you think about it as a simple problem. I need to make this skin less dry. Every compound you get on the market is going to be awash in thousands of chemicals. And one of the rules, and I forgot to mention this earlier, is you put one chemical because you only vary one variable. Classical engineering principles. When you come across a problem, you apply classical engineering principles. Change one variable, have patience, wait for the result. The human body is just a machine. Turnaround times are longer, but they are still not long enough that you can't measure your outcomes. So applied sciences.
Sometimes you don't always have the time to, my cholesterol was high, I threw everything at it. And now I'm kind of like reverse engineering my way through it. Mm-hmm. What was actually doing the heavy lifting? But yeah, I get your point. Yeah. I was like, I need this down now. Yeah.
And principles. You understand the principles of things. Every machine has rules. That's why you try and understand those rules. If you understand, it's like cooking. I'm actually a pretty good cook. And the reason why I'm a pretty good cook is I learned the basics. You learn techniques, and then you apply those techniques. And it goes for anything in life, whether you're working out, whether you're cooking, whether you're fixing a complex immune or biological problem. It's the same thing. Biochemistry, biomechanics, understand the rules, understand how things work, and actually take the time to understand how things work. And any problem is generally quite easy.
Excellent.
All right. Yep. Good way to end the episode.
Are we feeling healthier?
Yeah. All right. So yeah, once again, Bob, thank you for coming today to our studio. Yeah, everybody out there, hope you got something from this show today, and we will bid you a good day.
Take care.